Tonight we enter the ruins quietly, with the lamps lowered and the desert wind moving like breath across broken clay. In 2019, researchers studying ancient Mesopotamian tablets at major museum collections renewed attention on how fragile the earliest records truly are. Scholars from Oxford and Yale have long shown that Sumerian writing begins as accounts, lists, offerings, and names pressed into clay. Yet inside those practical marks, something older seems to breathe. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell us where you are listening from and what time it is there as the old world opens. You stand near the edge of ancient southern Mesopotamia, where the earth is flat, pale, and patient. The air tastes of dust, river salt, and sun-warmed reeds. Somewhere beyond the dark water, a temple platform rises like a sleeping animal. The Anunnaki are not yet clear. Their names have not hardened into certainty. They seem to wait behind the curtain of a later myth, powerful, distant, half-remembered. But the question is stranger than they are. What came before them? Records confirm that the earlier cities of Sumer grew from older village cultures, especially the long-obeyed horizon, where temples, irrigation, and social order were already taking shape. That is the mainstream doorway. It is quiet, scholarly, and carved from pottery, mud brick, and patient excavation. Yet there is a quirky little shadow beside it. Some fringe writers speak of a zero civilization, an unnamed order so old that even the gods inherited its ruins. A civilization before divine kingship, a forgotten first arrangement. Perhaps that is too much, perhaps not enough. Among scholars, debate continues over whether Mesopotamian myths preserve historical memories, ritual poetry, or symbolic maps of power. Stanford historians often remind us that myth is not simple fiction. It is a vessel. It carries fear, politics, memory, and longing in the same clay bowl. You walk closer to the tablet. It is small enough to hold in one hand. Its surface is cracked, but not defeated. The wedges remain, shallow and stubborn, like bird tracks pressed into drying mud. Someone made them thousands of years ago, probably without imagining you. That is almost funny. A scribe recording grain, gods, or kings becomes the keeper of a cosmic mystery. A tired accountant becomes, by accident, a doorkeeper to the beginning of time. The room around you smells faintly of wax, old wood, and museum dust. Glass cases reflect your face over objects that once belonged to priests, labourers, merchants, and children. The silence feels arranged. It feels almost ceremonial. And there, beneath the famous names, there is absence. The Anunnaki appear in later texts as great divine powers, connected with heaven, earth, judgment, and the deep structure of existence. They are not cartoon giants. They are not simple visitors from a shiny sky machine. They belong to a world where every riverbank, storm, illness, harvest, and royal command had sacred weight. But even sacred systems have beginnings, and beginnings often hide something they replaced. Long before recorded history, people were already watching floods, planting grain, shaping clay, and raising platforms above the marshes. They were not primitive in the lazy modern sense. They understood seasons, labour, storage, ritual, and authority. They knew that survival required memory. Memory is the first architecture. You imagine the landscape before great names became permanent. The Euphrates shifts in its bed. The Tigris brings silt from northern mountains. Reed huts cluster near water. Smoke rises from hearths at dawn. Children run barefoot over packed earth. Someone paints a bowl with dark lines, careful and steady. No one calls this place Sumer yet. No one whispers Anunnaki beneath the stars. Still, order exists. That is the first hidden truth. Civilization does not begin when people name it. It begins when hands repeat a pattern long enough for the pattern to outlive them. A wall is built, repaired, rebuilt, and remembered. A shrine is raised where another shrine stood. A story is told until its teller disappears. Then the story belongs to everyone. The so-called zero civilization is not something archaeology confirms as a lost empire. That would be too easy, and history rarely behaves politely. Instead, it is a mood created by gaps. It lives in the spaces between clay tablets, buried floors, flood deposits, and mythic timelines that stretch impossibly far. The unsettling part is not that proof exists. The unsettling part is that memory does. Ancient people kept speaking of a time before the settled order, before kingship descended, before gods took their places in councils and temples. They imagined beginnings as layered, not simple. First there was the deep, then separation, then divine labour, then human duty. A system slowly appears. Not a clean line, but a buried staircase. You descend one step at a time. Each step is cooler than the last. The noise of the modern world softens behind you. Cars vanish. Screens dim. The night becomes older. In the darkness, you can almost hear the scratch of reed on wet clay. A scholar might tell you to be careful, and rightly so. The British Museum and university collections hold thousands of tablets, but fragments do not speak in full sentences unless we force them. Translation is patient work. Context matters. A broken line can tempt the imagination like a doorway left open. Still, the doorway is there. The early Mesopotamian mind did not picture creation as emptiness suddenly becoming modern life. It imagined a layered cosmos filled with older forces, inherited duties, and dangerous boundaries. The gods themselves belonged to families, ranks, places, and offices. They had ancestors, they had rivals, they had forgotten beginnings. So you ask the question softly, if the Anunnaki had a place in the sacred order, who arranged the room before they entered? The wind moves against the mud brick wall. No answer comes, only the feeling of great age, somewhere beneath the later temples of Uruk, beneath the polished stories of divine kings, beneath the lists that give impossible reigns to ancient rulers. There may be a memory of people who lived before the world could explain itself. Not superhuman, not necessarily magical, just earlier, more silent, more deeply buried, and perhaps, over time, their works became myth. A platform becomes a mountain, a ruler becomes a god, a vanished culture becomes a race before memory, a practical ritual becomes cosmic law. It happens slowly. That is how history sleeps. You remain beside the tablet as the lamplight fades. The wedges no longer look like writing alone. They look like a shoreline where the known world meets a darker sea. The Anunnaki wait somewhere beyond that sea, but tonight the tide is moving the other way. You are not following the gods forward into legend. You are stepping behind them, toward the dim place where names dissolve, where civilization is still forming, where the first builders leave no statues, only foundations, and perhaps, in that silence before the divine court, something older is still listening. Your mind drifts into a land before names have shadows, before the great cities become famous enough to attract kings, armies, and museum labels. The plain spreads wide beneath a copper-coloured sky, broken by channels of water that shine like thin strips of beaten metal. The air is warm, heavy, and full of insects. Reeds whisper at the river edge, making a sound like fingers brushing dry linen. You walk where southern Mesopotamia is still becoming itself. There are no stone palaces here. Stone is rare, and every heavy thing must be brought from far away. The people build with mud, water, straw, and patience. Their houses rise from the earth and return to it, which is terribly inconvenient for archaeologists, but rather elegant for eternity. Clay remembers, yet it also forgives. Records from excavations across ancient Iraq confirm that settled communities existed for millennia before the famous Sumerian city-states. Researchers at the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania have studied layers showing long development and farming, storage, ritual spaces, and village planning. Civilization did not arrive like a trumpet blast. It thickened gradually, like silt after floodwater. You feel that slow thickening beneath your feet. The ground is not empty. It is crowded with vanished routines. A woman carries grain in a woven basket. A child shapes wet mud into a small animal and abandons it in the sun. An old man repairs a reed mat near a doorway. Someone stirs a pot scented with barley, fish, and bitter herbs gathered from the marsh. No one thinks they are living in prehistory. That word belongs to us, to them. The world is immediate, demanding and full of signs. Birds lift suddenly from the reeds, and someone notices. The river drops lower than expected, and someone remembers the same thing happened when a child was born. A storm breaks the heat, and the elders speak carefully around the fire. Meaning gathers wherever danger lingers. The central mystery begins to feel less like a single hidden empire, and more like an inheritance without a title. Before the Anunnaki stand in written tradition, older communities already arrange the world through work, taboo, offering, and seasonal rhythm. They do not need a divine court carved in language. They already live inside a sacred geography of water, mud, sky, and hunger. A council decree cannot prove these first fears, because councils come later. But the pattern of shrines and repeated settlement floors proves that memory is being fixed in place. One building stands where an earlier building stood. One ritual space renews an older one. One generation inherits not only tools, but locations of awe. That is how a nameless world begins to grow a skeleton. You pause beside a low platform made from packed clay. It is not yet the monumental temple tower of later imagination. It is modest, sun-cracked, and edged with footprints. Still, people approach it differently. Their voices lower, their bodies slow. Even the children seem to understand that some places are not merely useful. The platform smells of dust and baked earth. A fringe tidbit lingers at the edges of this scene. Some alternative theorists argue that these repeated platforms hint at knowledge passed down from a far older, unknown society. They imagine master builders teaching flood survivors where to raise sacred centres. It is a strange idea, and perhaps it reaches too eagerly. Yet it grows from a real observation. Ancient sacred places often sit on older sacred places. History loves to reuse the same address. Among scholars, there remains careful debate over how much continuity exists between the Ubaid communities and the later Sumerian world. Some experts see deep cultural threads, especially in temple forms and settlement organisation. Others warn that continuity can be exaggerated when broken evidence is stitched into a smooth story. The past is not smooth. It is cracked like a drying canal bed. You kneel and touch the packed floor. It is rough against your fingertips, full of grit, tiny shells, and straw fragments. This floor once held bodies. People stood here with sore backs, sunburned faces, and practical worries. They wondered if the river would behave. They worried about food. They noticed who controlled storage. They knew who could speak for the unseen powers. Power begins quietly. It begins with water distribution, seed grain, ritual timing, and the person who says when to open the storehouse. It begins with someone remembering the old rule. It begins with someone claiming the old rule came from beyond human argument. That is not cynicism, it is structure. For a moment, it feels as though you can hear the first social machinery turning. No gears, no metal, no throne, just obligations linking household to household. The smell of cooking smoke drifts through the village. Dogs bark in the distance. Sandals squeak on damp ground near the canal. There is a softness here, but not innocence. Early life is intimate with death, weather, and scarcity. A failed harvest can empty a settlement. A shift in river course can turn a familiar path into cracked waste. Floodwater can bring fertility, then remove walls, tools, graves, and family memory in a single brown sweep. So people build meaning sturdy enough to survive panic. Long before recorded history, these communities may have imagined powers older than themselves, not because they were foolish, but because the world behaved like a living authority. Rivers commanded, storms judged, soil rewarded patience, heat punished the careless. The sky watched everything and explained nothing. A little gentle sarcasm floats in the warm air. Modern people congratulate themselves for replacing gods with systems, then spend their lives obeying calendars, banks, weather alerts, and glowing rectangles. The ancient villagers might recognize the habit immediately, only the costumes have improved. You continue through the settlement as evening settles low and red. Hearth smoke thickens, and the first stars appear with unsettling clarity. No city wall rises against the horizon. No royal inscription declares victory. Yet the ingredients of later civilization are already present. Quiet as seeds. Storage creates surplus. Surplus creates responsibility. Responsibility creates rank. Rank seeks blessing. Blessing seeks story. And story seeks older story. This is where the hidden timeline begins to breathe. Not in a dramatic lost continent. Not in a golden tower beneath the sand. But in the possibility that later myths remembered a world already ancient to those who wrote them down. The Anunnaki, when they finally emerge in language, may carry the weight of countless unnamed generations who stood under this same sky. You look up. The stars do not care what century it is. Somewhere overhead, the constellation seems scattered like grain across a dark threshing floor. Below them, the village settles into night. A baby cries, a reed door creaks. Water moves through a channel with the faint sound of someone whispering from another room. Before names, there is pattern. Before gods, there is fear and gratitude. Before temples, there is the chosen place where people return, again and again. Because something about the earth there feels different. You stand in that difference and let the darkness gather slowly. The world has not yet become myth, but it is already preparing itself. Every footprint, every offering, every rebuilt wall presses another layer into the ground. The hidden truth is not shouting from the sky. It is lying beneath the village floor, patient and almost amused. The first shadows of civilization do not fall behind people. They fall ahead of them. For a moment, it feels as though the clay itself is awake beneath your hands. Not alive in the ordinary sense, of course. That would be inconvenient for museum staff. Yet the tablet seems to hold a warmth that should have vanished thousands of years ago, a faint memory of palms, reed tools, oil lamps, and anxious breath. You are near the scribble room now, where the past becomes deliberate. The light is low. Smoke from a small lamp curls upward and darkens the ceiling. A reed stylus rests beside a lump of damp clay. The room smells of river mud, wool, sweat, and the sharp green scent of cut reeds. Outside, someone leads a donkey along a narrow lane, and its hooves make soft hollow sounds in the dust. Here, memory stops, depending only on voices. It begins to harden. Mainstream records confirm that early writing in Mesopotamia developed from administrative marks, tokens, seals, and accounting systems. Scholars at Yale and the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago have traced how practical recording slowly became written language. The first signs were not grand poems about heaven. They were about grain, labour, animals, and goods. A cosmic mystery begins with bookkeeping. Naturally, the universe has a sense of humour. You watch the scribe press a wedge into clay. The motion is small, almost dull, yet the result is enormous. A sound becomes a sign, a number becomes authority, a delivery becomes proof, a name becomes harder to erase. That is the strange power of clay. It does not merely remember what people believed. It also remembers what they needed to control: food, work, temples, herds, boundaries, offerings, debts. Then, slowly, the sacred enters the record. Gods appear in lists, temples appear as institutions, offerings are counted, divine names are written beside sheep, jars, flour, and fields. The invisible world becomes part of administration, which is either deeply spiritual or hilariously bureaucratic, depending on your mood. Perhaps both. You lean closer to the marks. Some belong to a world of visible things. Others point toward powers no eye can hold. The oldest written tradition does not begin by explaining everything. It gives fragments, labels, accounts, and formal phrases. It leaves silence around them. That silence matters. The clay remembers earlier hands because writing did not invent belief. It caught belief already moving. By the time divine names entered tablets, people had been performing rituals, telling origin stories, and returning to sacred places for many generations. The tablets are not the first breath of mythology. They are the first preserved whisper. A quirky tidbit drifts through the dust. Some fringe writers claim that undeciphered marks or strange symbols on prehistoric pottery may encode remnants of a forgotten master tradition. They see secret messages in repeated shapes, crossed lines, and painted eyes. Most scholars remain cautious, as scholars tend to do when someone brings them a cosmic key over lunch. Still, patterns existed before writing. A painted bowl can carry memory. A seal can carry authority. A repeated sign can train the mind to expect hidden meaning. Even when the claim goes too far, the instinct behind it is not foolish. Humans have always pressed worlds into symbols and hoped someone would understand. Your fingers hover above the tablet, not touching it now. The air feels dry. Among historians, an open debate continues over how oral tradition shaped written mythology in early Mesopotamia. Researchers at Oxford have emphasized that written texts often preserve older spoken material, but they also reshape it through scribble schools, temple politics, and literary training. A story can be ancient in memory, yet new in form. This is where the trail becomes delicate. You cannot simply read a later tablet and step straight into the first dawn. The tablet is a doorway. Yes, but also a mirror. It reflects the world of the scribe, the temple, the school, and the society that preserved it. Every word has travelled through human hands. Still, the older world presses through. When later tablets speak of divine assemblies as primeval waters, labouring gods, and cosmic ordering, they do not feel invented from nothing. They feel assembled from older materials, like a wall rebuilt with bricks from a vanished shrine. Each brick carries a trace of earlier weather. You hear students reciting in the next room. Their voices rise and fall, careful, bored, nervous. A teacher corrects them with the ancient patience of someone who has heard the same mistake 600 times. The students copy lists of signs, names, professions, places, and gods. The world becomes sortable. That is another hidden step. Once things can be listed, they can be ranked. Once they can be ranked, they can be arranged into systems. The Anunnaki will one day stand within such systems, not as random spirits, but as members of a structured sacred order. Yet behind the list lies the unlisted. Behind the named gods lies the older pressure that made naming necessary. You imagine the scribe pausing, stylus in hand, while dusk darkens the doorway. He knows the correct forms. He knows which divine names belong in which sequence. He knows what must be copied because his teacher copied it, and his teacher's teacher copied it. And because temples do not enjoy improvisation, temples prefer tradition. So do institutions everywhere. But tradition has roots that disappear underground. The deeper they go, the harder they are to follow. A name may preserve an older title. A ritual may preserve a forgotten crisis. A myth may preserve a social arrangement that no longer exists. The clay does not explain this kindly. It simply sits there. You must listen around the words. There are tablets that name gods whose stories are almost lost. There are divine figures who appear briefly, like faces glimpsed through a reed screen. Some are attached to places that later declined. Some belong to cults absorbed by stronger cities. Some may represent powers once important in communities that vanished into larger Sumerian culture. Not all forgotten beings are cosmic ancestors. Some are local memories that lost political support. That's a very human fate. The hidden truth grows more subtle. What came before the Anunnaki may not be one grand race, one lost empire, or one secret council beneath the earth. It may be many earlier sacred worlds, absorbed, renamed, rearranged, and politely buried under later theology. 1,000 village powers become a smaller number of great gods. 1,000 local memories become literature. 1,000 unnamed builders become silence. You sit in that silence as night settles over the scribal quarter. The lamp flame trembles. Clay tablets dry on a reed mat, each one hardening into a little locked room. Some will break. Some will be reused. Some will sleep under rubble until modern hands lift them again. Perhaps that is the strangest thing. The earliest surviving words are not always the earliest thoughts. They are merely the thoughts lucky enough to become clay. Beneath them lies a deeper archive made of gestures, songs, footprints, offerings, and places visited so often that the ground itself seems instructed. The tablet before you is not the beginning. It is the surviving edge of something larger, and as you watch the last wet mark dry into permanence, you sense the old question turning slowly in the dark. Before the divine names became official, before the sacred lists became orderly, before the Anunnaki stood in the written heavens, older hands were already arranging the invisible world. The clay remembers them poorly, but it remembers enough. In your ears, the echo changes into the sound of names being recited very slowly, as if each one must pass through a doorway. A scribe sits under lamplight with a tablet across his knees, reading a list that does not behave like ordinary history. Kings appear, cities rise, reigns stretch beyond the limits of flesh. Time becomes strange, swollen, almost dreamlike. You are standing near the world of the flood lists. The room is dim, and the walls seem to lean inward. Clay shelves hold tablets in careful rows, though careful is a generous word for objects that crumble when handled badly. A faint scent of bitumen and dry reeds hangs in the air. Somewhere outside, water moves against a quay, tapping softly at wooden posts. The list begins with kingship. Not kings at first, kingship itself. That detail matters. In the ancient imagination, rule is not merely invented by ambitious men with impressive hats. Rule descends. Authority has a sacred origin, like rain, like fate, like a burden lowered from the sky into human cities. The idea is calm on the surface, but beneath it something powerful stirs. Mainstream history confirms that the Sumerian king list survives in several ancient copies, with rulers placed before and after a great flood. Scholars at Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania have studied how the text blends political memory, theology, and royal ideology. It is not a modern timeline, it is a map of legitimacy. That makes it more interesting. Modern readers often trip over the impossible numbers. Some rulers are said to reign for tens of thousands of years. Sensible people blink at that. Take a sip of tea and decide someone has made a small accounting error the size of a mountain. Yet ancient numbers often carry meaning beyond arithmetic. They can express sacred scale, cosmic order, or deliberate distance from ordinary time. The ancient past is being stretched until it feels untouchable. You listen as the names pass one by one. Cities like Eridu, Bad Tabira, Larak, Sippar, and Shurapak drift through the room. They are not merely locations. They are stations in a sacred sequence. Each city receives kingship, holds it for an age, then loses it. Power moves. It does not begin with the dynasty you know. It arrives from somewhere beyond the visible world, settles for a while, then travels onward like a restless flame. This pattern suggests a memory of shifting centres, older cults, and cities that competed to claim first place in creation. A quirky fringe tidbit settles beside the tablet like a moth. Alternative writers often point to the enormous reign lengths as evidence of non-human rulers or survivors from a forgotten age. They imagine beings from a pre-divine order, living through cycles no human body could endure. It is an exciting thought, and excitement is not evidence. Although it does sell many books with dramatic covers, still the numbers are not meaningless. They tell you the compilers wanted deep time. They wanted a past so ancient that ordinary kings looked small beside it. They wanted the roots of power to sink below memory, below argument, below the reach of anyone who might say, quite rudely, that their king was just another man. A scholarly debate remains open around how the list uses older traditions. Some historians at Yale argue that parts of it may preserve memories of early political centres, while others emphasise its later purpose as a tool of royal unity. Both positions can be true. Ancient texts are perfectly capable of doing two things at once, which is more than can be said for many modern printers. You step toward a doorway and see the city beyond the scribal house. The evening air is thick with the smell of river mud and cooking smoke. Men carry baskets from the boat. Women speak near a wall where fish hang drying in the last light. A child pokes at a beetle with a reed stem, performing important research of the usual childhood kind. Life continues beneath impossible time. That contrast is the secret beauty of the king list. On one level, it speaks in vast ages and sacred transfers. On another, it belongs to real communities concerned with rule, memory, and order. People needed to know where authority came from. They needed a story large enough to make obedience feel cosmic, and perhaps they needed reassurance that chaos had limits. The flood in the list cuts time in two. Before it, reigns are huge and remote. After it, history begins to move closer to human scale. Not immediately, not neatly, but noticeably. The flood becomes a hinge, a dark shining line across memory. Water erases. Water also explains erasure. In a river civilization, this makes terrible sense. Floods bring silt, food, and renewal, but they also swallow homes, graves, and archives. A flood can become a memory of disaster, then a symbol of cosmic reset, then a boundary between worlds. By the time it enters literature, it is more than weather. You stand at that boundary and feel the ground damp beneath your sandals. The air has cooled. Frogs begin calling in the marsh. The sky is violet above the reed beds. A smell of wet clay rises from the canal bank, rich and dark, like the breath of the earth opening after heat. Long before recorded history, communities must have told stories of waters that came too high, of settlements abandoned, of shrines rebuilt on safer ground. Each retelling could push the event farther back. Each generation could widen the distance. Eventually, the flood might no longer belong to one river season. It might belong to the architecture of existence. Before the flood, after the flood. Such phrases comfort the mind because they divide the unimaginable. The hidden timeline grows clearer now, though not simpler. There is remembered time, written time, royal time, and mythic time. They overlap like layers of plaster on a temple wall. Scratch one surface, and an older colour appears beneath it. Scratch deeper, and the wall begins to crumble in your hand. The so-called zero civilization lives in that crumbling place, not as a proven kingdom, but as a question made of scale. Why did early scribes imagine rulership reaching so far backward? Why did they place authority before the flood, in a time almost beyond human counting? Why did divine order seem older than any city that claimed it? Perhaps because civilization felt inherited even to its earliest writers. Perhaps because every beginning they knew had another beginning beneath it. You return to the tablet and let the recitation slow. The names are no longer just names. They are stones placed across a dark river. You cannot see the far bank clearly, but the stones tell you someone believed a crossing existed. The Anunnaki are still not the centre of this moment. The centre is older authority, descending before familiar history, moving through cities, surviving catastrophe, and becoming text. The gods, later named in grand systems, stand in a room already built by memory. The list does not give you certainty. It gives you depth. And as the final line is read, the silence afterward feels heavier than the words. It is the silence of missing tablets, drowned settlements, broken dynasties, and stories that survived by changing shape. Somewhere inside that silence, The past stretches backward beyond every comfortable date. The flood is past, but the water has not finished speaking. Your mind settles into a quieter chamber, where the question is no longer who ruled first, but what kind of order existed before rule became visible. The air is cooler here. The floor is packed earth. A low lamp burns with a narrow blue edge, and the walls carry faint stains from smoke, hands, and years of human nearness. You feel structure before you see it. It is present in the way baskets are stacked, in the way jars are sealed, in the way offerings are placed with careful distance between them. Nothing seems accidental. Even silence has been arranged. This is the first forgotten order. It is not a kingdom in the familiar sense. There are no banners snapping in the wind, no bronze gates, no boastful ruler announcing that he alone invented civilization before breakfast. Instead, there is pattern, repeated until it becomes authority. Work is divided, time is counted, sacred places are approached in expected ways. Records from early Mesopotamian settlements confirm that large-scale organization existed before fully developed urban kingship. Excavations studied by universities such as Chicago, Cambridge, and Pennsylvania show planned buildings, storage systems, craft specialization, and ritual architecture growing over long centuries. The evidence is not theatrical, it is quieter, which somehow makes it more persuasive. You walk past rows of clay jars. Each jar has a purpose. Some hold grain, some hold oil, some hold dates or dried fish. A cord seals one mouth. A small lump of clay bears an impression. The impression says, in its own ancient language, someone is watching. That is where order sharpens. A seal is not just decoration. It is trust made visible and suspicion made useful. It says this vessel belongs within a system. It says the contents have been counted. It says hands may touch, but not freely. A society begins when memory needs protection. You hear footsteps in a corridor. A person carries a tray toward a raised room. The tray holds bread, beer, and something fragrant, perhaps herbs crushed with oil. The offering is humble, but the motion is formal. The person does not improvise. The body has learned the ritual. This is how a sacred system grows, not from one revelation alone, but from repetition. The same path is walked. The same doorway is crossed. The same words are spoken over food, water, birth, illness, and death. After enough years, the ritual feels older than the people performing it. That feeling is powerful. A quirky fringe tidbit clings to this idea like dust on wool. Some writers imagine that the first forgotten order was a coded survival system, left by a vanished civilization. A set of instructions hidden inside ritual gestures, temple alignments, and sacred numbers. The claim reaches far beyond the evidence, as fringe claims often do with impressive enthusiasm. Yet the instinct behind it notices something real. Ancient rituals often preserve older habits. Emotion may outlive its explanation. A taboo may survive the danger that created it. A festival may remember an agricultural crisis long after nobody recalls the specific famine. Human beings are excellent at keeping forms and forgetting reasons. Rather charming, really. You pass a courtyard where workers shape bricks under the sun. The smell is thick and earthy. Mud squelches under hands and feet. Straw glints inside the wet clay. Each brick is almost the same size, almost the same shape, almost the same promise. One brick means little. Many bricks become intention. The first forgotten order may have been this ability to make people act together across time. A wall cannot rise from impulse. A canal cannot function through mood. A storehouse cannot feed anyone if everyone eats from it whenever hunger whispers. Cooperation must be trained, defended, and sanctified. Among scholars, debate continues over whether early temple institutions drove the rise of hierarchy, or whether emerging elites used ritual spaces to strengthen power already forming in households and councils. Researchers at Oxford and Harvard have written about these possibilities with careful disagreement. No single explanation holds the entire river. The evidence flows around every theory. You stand near a canal gate. Water presses against woven barriers and packed mud. Someone must open it at the right time. Someone must close it before the fields drown. Someone must decide which plot drinks first and which waits. There it is again. Authority before kingship. Not crowned, perhaps not even named as authority, but felt in the timing of water. Whoever controls the calendar, the gate, the granary, or the ritual has touched the nerves of the community. The later gods may be grand, but the first order begins with survival. The sun lowers, the mud walls turn gold, then brown, then violet. Insects gather near the water. The scent of damp reeds mixes with animal dung and warm bread. Somewhere, a woman laughs briefly, and the sound disappears into the courtyard like a small bird. You notice something unsettling. This world does not need writing to be complex. It does not need a famous god to be sacred. It does not need a palace to contain politics. The hidden system is already there, living in bodies, tools, storage rooms, and shared fear of disorder. Perhaps that is what later myth remembers as the age before name divine rule. Not empty chaos, but a difficult older arrangement, a world where power had not yet been sorted into the personalities of great gods, but existed as pressure, custom, and inherited obligation, long before recorded history. Order may have felt less like law and more like atmosphere. You breathed it. You obeyed it. You were born into it, as naturally as heat, river, and sky. When later people imagined gods assigning tasks and arranging the cosmos, perhaps they were giving faces to something their ancestors had already lived. The world had always demanded structure. Myth simply made the demands speak. A platform rises at the settlement centre. Its edges are worn by feet. At the top, a room holds objects not used in ordinary life. Fine vessels, painted fragments, offerings, perhaps a symbol of a power that has no permanent name. You do not know. No one kindly labels it for you. That uncertainty is the point. The first forgotten order does not stand before you as a statue. It appears as alignment, doorways facing certain spaces, storage near ritual areas, labour gathered around sacred buildings, people moving as though the place itself gives instructions. The hidden timeline is becoming less like a row of dates and more like a submerged machine. Pieces turn beneath the surface. Later cities will polish them. Later scribes will name them. Later gods will inherit them. But the mechanism is older. It is made of grain, water, fear, and reverence. You sit beside the canal as night comes on. The water darkens until it reflects only the first stars. A faint breeze moves through the reeds, bringing the smell of wet clay and distant hearth smoke. The settlement grows quiet, but not empty. Inside houses, people sleep beneath roofs built by rules they did not invent. That is how deep order works. It becomes invisible. You can almost sense the Zero civilization not as a lost nation, but as the ghost of first systems. A hidden arrangement beneath later sacred history, a pattern so old that, when the Anunnaki finally appear in written tradition, they seem less like inventors and more like inheritors. The forgotten order does not speak loudly. It does not need to. It waits beneath every temple floor, every sealed jar, every measured field, every story where creation means arrangement rather than beginning. And in the slow-breathing dark, you understand that the first mystery may not be what came before the gods. It may be what taught humanity to expect order at all. For a moment, heaven has no court, no polished throne room of gods, no fixed council where divine names sit in tidy importance. The sky above you is immense and undecided, a dark blue vault trembling with stars. It does not yet feel owned by anyone. It simply arches over the land, cold, remote, and almost unbearably still. You stand outside a sanctuary before dawn. The air smells of ash, damp clay, and crushed reeds. A low wind moves through the settlement, touching doorways and lifting fine dust from the ground. Somewhere, an animal shifts in its pen. Somewhere else, a sleeper murmurs and turns beneath a woven blanket. Nothing has begun speaking yet. Mainstream evidence shows that Mesopotamian religion developed through many local cults, city traditions, and changing divine relationships over centuries. Scholars at Oxford and the University of Chicago have long emphasized that the later divine hierarchy was not born complete. It was assembled, adapted, and reorganized as cities grew more powerful. That is a quiet but important fact. A god who later seems eternal may once have been local. A name that later dominates hymns may once have belonged to one city, one shrine, one landscape. Divine importance could rise with political fortune, trade routes, conquest, and temple wealth. Heaven, in other words, had a history. How rude of heaven! You look across the open ground toward a small raised platform. There are offerings there, but no grand image gleams in the darkness. No elaborate statue gazes from a high chamber. The sacred presence is less defined, almost atmospheric. It lives in the place, the hour, the gesture, the fear of doing something incorrectly. The earlier sacred world may not have needed a court. It may have needed thresholds, a doorway between household and shrine, a boundary between clean and unclean, a line between field and desert, a moment when ordinary speech becomes ritual speech. Such boundaries are older than theology, and they often survive beneath theology like roots beneath a garden path. You hear sandals scrape softly nearby. A figure approaches with a small bowl. The person moves slowly, not because anyone is watching, but because the unseen is being treated as present. The bowl is set down. A few drops are poured onto the earth. The scent rises sharp and sour. The gesture is brief, yet it changes the morning. A quirky fringed tidbit appears like a glimmer at the edge of the firelight. Some alternative theorists imagine a time when the sky gods had not yet arrived, and earthbound powers or primeval intelligences governed the world instead. They connect this idea to serpent symbols, mother figures, and mysterious prehistoric marks. The evidence does not support a single hidden priesthood, but the imagery is fascinating. It points to something older than named hierarchy. Before divine courts become orderly, sacred power may be plural, fluid, and attached to immediate experience. The storm has force, the marsh has force, the birthroom has force, the grave has force, the deep water has force because people cannot see its bottom. Unseen depth invites personality. Among historians of religion, debate continues over how early Mesopotamian gods became organized into families and councils. Scholars at Yale and Harvard have explored whether these systems reflect political structures, temple scholarship, older mythic inheritance, or all of them woven together. The answer remains open, because religion does not leave fossils as neatly as shellfish. It leaves songs, lists, ruins, and habits. You enter the sanctuary as dawn turns the doorway grey. The floor is swept clean. The walls are plain, their plaster cracked in faint branching lines. A niche stands at the far end. It may hold an emblem, a vessel, or a small divine symbol. It may also hold absence, which can be rather effective when managed properly. The room is quiet enough to make your own breathing noticeable. Here, before heaven has a court, sacred authority is not yet a crowded genealogy. It is nearness. Something is near the shrine. Something is near the water. Something is near the dead. People act accordingly. Later, the Anunnaki will appear within a more formal world of divine ranks and cosmic duties. They will be connected with decisions, fates, underworld depths, and the terrifying machinery of order. But in this older atmosphere, the machinery has not yet been given all its official names. You sense the parts before the diagram. There is sky above, dark water below, earth between, and human beings moving nervously in the middle. That arrangement alone is enough to create metaphysics, even without anyone using a complicated word at dinner. The sky is distant. The deep is dangerous. The earth is hungry. Humans must negotiate with all three. You step back into the morning light. Smoke rises from homes. A young person carries fuel. An older woman sprinkles water near a doorway. A man checks a canal bank with the exhausted seriousness of someone who knows mud has opinions. The sacred is not separate from ordinary work. It clings to it. It sits inside grain measures, childbirth, oath-making, illness, and travel. A god does not need a throne if every dangerous moment is already a doorway. That may be what came before the court of heaven. A world of presences before personalities. A world of powers before offices. A world where the sacred is felt first as pressure, then slowly shaped into names. You walk toward the marsh, where the land dissolves into reeds and shining channels. Birds rise suddenly, black against the pale sky. The water smells green, metallic, and alive. Beneath its surface, fish flicker and vanish. The horizon is low, making the sky feel enormous. It is easy to understand why people looked upward. It is just as easy to understand why they feared below. The later divine systems of Mesopotamia often arranged the cosmos into regions and roles. Heaven, earth, and the underworld belong to an ordered imagination. But perhaps, in a time no longer remembered clearly, these were not regions on a map. They were sensations. Height, ground, depth, light, mud, breath, silence. Myth may have grown from those sensations. Slowly, like reeds from water, a mainstream fact steadies the dream. Archaeologists have found that many Mesopotamian temples were repeatedly rebuilt on the same sacred sites, suggesting long continuity of place. Yet the divine names and rituals associated with those places could change through time. The ground stayed, the stories shifted. This is important. The sacred address may be older than the god who receives the mail. You smile at that, gently, because the ancient world is full of such administrative surprises. A place can outlive a name, a ritual can outlive a doctrine, a fear can outlive the explanation built to contain it. So when you ask what stood before the Anunnaki, one answer might be sacred place itself, not a being, not a royal race, not a secret council in glittering robes, but the first human recognition that certain spaces feel charged. The spring, the mound, the burial ground, the flood line, the raised platform where people speak softly. The sky brightens. The sanctuary behind you becomes ordinary again, at least to the eye. Its wall is mud brick, its roof is reeds, its floor is swept earth. But the gestures performed there have altered it. Memory has thickened around it. Heaven will one day become populated with named powers. The court will fill. Duties will be assigned. Genealogies shaped. Hymns composed. And scribes will put divine order into lines of clay. Yet beneath that full arrangement remains a quieter age, when power was not yet seated in council, and the sacred moved like mist across landscape and body. You stand between the marsh and the shrine. Morning birds call over the water. The sun lifts slowly, turning the reeds gold at their tips. The world feels newly made, but not young. It feels ancient without explanation. Perhaps the first gods were not born from stories. Perhaps stories were born because the world already felt inhabited, and in that calm unease, under a sky not yet divided among rulers, you begin to understand how heaven might have existed before it had court. Your mind drifts toward the phrase that should not feel ancient, yet somehow does. Zero civilization. It sounds modern, almost too neat, like something written on a black folder in a documentary office. Still, beneath the polished phrase lies an older feeling, the suspicion that every known beginning rests on something unnamed. You're walking across a landscape after rain. The ground is soft, and each step leaves a dark print in the clay. Low clouds move over the plain. The scent of wet soil rises heavily, mixed with reeds, animal pens, and distant smoke. No monument stands nearby. No carved king watches from stone. Only shallow mounds interrupt the horizon. their shapes softened by centuries of weather. A civilization can vanish without looking dramatic. That is the uncomfortable thought. Mainstream archaeology confirms that cultures can disappear, transform, or be absorbed without leaving grand ruins. Researchers at Stanford and Cambridge have often emphasized that social changes not always collapse with fire and screaming. Sometimes pottery styles shift, trade patterns alter, settlements shrink, a sacred habit survives under a new name. The zero civilization theory grows from that quiet possibility. It proposes, in its softest form, that before the remembered divine systems of Mesopotamia, there may have been an earlier cultural order whose influence remained but whose identity vanished. Not a glittering empire of impossible machines, not necessarily beings descending from the stars with suspiciously convenient engineering skills, rather an unnamed layer of human organization beneath later myth. That version is cautious. Naturally, caution is less popular at parties. More dramatic versions imagine a lost first civilization destroyed by flood, drought, or cosmic disaster. Some fringe writers place it before the oldest known cities, claiming that myths of gods, long reigns, and primeval teachers preserve the fading outline of its rulers. These claims step beyond secure evidence, but they reveal a persistent human hunger. You want history to have a hidden room. Perhaps everyone does. You stop beside a mound where broken pottery lies half exposed. Each fragment is dull, worn, and patient. A painted line curves across one piece, ending at a break. It may once have formed part of a pattern. Now it resembles a question that forgot the rest of itself. The wind moves gently over the site. The idea of zero civilization should not be treated as proof. It is better handled like a lantern held near a dark wall. It shows cracks, not answers. It draws attention to what archaeology already knows. The first written civilizations inherited skills, symbols, settlements, and ritual landscapes from older communities. Writing begins late. Human memory begins earlier. Among scholars, debate continues over how much complexity existed in communities before the earliest urban states. Some researchers at Yale focus on gradual developments in irrigation, administration, and ritual authority. Others argue that sudden environmental pressures may have accelerated social change. The disagreement is careful, and the truth may be annoyingly mixed. History enjoys refusing simple plots. You walk down the slope of the mound and enter a dry channel. The mud at its base is cracked in curling plates, like old paint. Once, water moved here. Perhaps people dug it, cleaned it, cursed it, repaired it, and depended on it. Now it is silent. A canal's kind of argument with nature. It says the river will not be allowed to behave entirely as it wishes. It says human labour can guide fertility. It says land can be redesigned. Whoever first organised such labour created more than agriculture. They created shared obligation, and shared obligation can become sacred very quickly. Maybe that is where the hidden civilization truly hides. Not in a buried palace, but in the invention of durable cooperation. The 0 point may not be a city. It may be the first system that made cities possible, a network of trust, food, ritual, and command strong enough to survive the death of its founders. Once that exists, later generations can build temples, write tablets, and name gods who seem to have always been there. You touch the side of the dry channel. The clay is cool. It has held water, footprints, roots, and silence. No myth is carved into it, yet it may contain the practical foundation of every myth that came later. A people who master water may begin to imagine cosmic order as something that can be managed. A people who depend on flood cycles may imagine creation as regulation of chaos. That is not a small inheritance. The phrase zero civilization also carries a deeper unease. It suggests that history might have an unseen basement. We walk through the known rooms, admiring inscriptions and kings, while below us lie older foundations without labels. We can feel their weight, but cannot furnish them confidently. The scholarly mind resists invention. The storytelling mind leans closer. Both are needed, though they bicker like relatives at a festival. You continue beneath a sky now clearing at the edges. Sunlight touches the wet plain, turning puddles into mirrors. In one, clouds float upside down. In another, a bird leaves tiny marks along the rim. The world looks temporary and eternal at once. This is where speculation becomes almost restful. Perhaps the zero civilization is not one people at all. Perhaps it is a collective memory of several vanished communities, each contributing a fragment. One group mastered canals, another shaped sacred platforms, another carried myths of flood and deep water, another preserved numbers, calendars, and ritual sequences. Later scribes gathered these fragments without knowing their full age. The older system became invisible because it succeeded. When a pattern works long enough, people stop noticing it. They inherit the canal, the shrine, the festival, the grain measure, and the sacred boundary. They ask who gave these things, and the answer becomes divine. That is how humanity often explains ancient usefulness. A mainstream fact grounds the mist again. Archaeological layers beneath famous sites such as Eridu and Uruk show long occupation before full urban life. Excavators found earlier temples and settlement phases below later monumental levels. This does not prove a hidden super-civilization, but it proves deep continuity. Deep continuity is haunting enough. You imagine standing in a later temple, unaware that beneath your feet lie older floors, then older floors beneath those, each one once considered complete. People walked there with confidence. They believed their world was the present. They did not know they were becoming a layer. Neither do you. The thought is mildly impolite. Zero civilization theory, at its best, invites humility. It asks you to remember that the first people to write were not the first people to think deeply. The first city names were not the first sacred places. The first gods in tablets were not the first powers people feared, fed, thanked, or argued with in the night. Before the Anunnaki, there may have been no single throne. There may have been a field of older memories. Some became gods, some became rituals, some became numbers, some became forgotten villages under larger streets, some became nothing you can name, though they still shaped the world that followed. The rain has stopped completely now. Evening approaches and the plain exhales its damp warmth. Frogs begin calling from a hidden pool. Far away, a line of smoke rises from a settlement you cannot reach before dark. You stand alone among broken pottery and soft clay. The zero civilization does not reveal itself. It does not step from the mound with a crown in its hands. It remains an idea, a shadow cast by missing evidence and inherited order. Yet shadows also tell you something about the shape of light. Perhaps the hidden truth is not that a lost empire waits beneath Mesopotamia. Perhaps the truth is quieter. Civilization may have begun before it knew its own name, and by the time the gods were written down, the oldest builders had already disappeared into the ground. The ground rises in front of you as a mound, low and rounded, like a sleeping back beneath the open sky. It does not look like a city. It looks like earth pretending to be innocent. Wind moves over it, carrying the smell of dry grass, salt dust, and distant river water. You climb slowly. Each step crosses centuries. Beneath your feet, cities lie under cities, not as perfect buried worlds, but as compressed layers of human wanting. A wall falls, a floor is levelled, a new room is built above the old one. Ash is covered by clay, clay is covered by brick, brick is covered by forgetting. Archaeology confirms this pattern across Mesopotamia. Excavations at places like Uruk, Eridu, and Nippur revealed long sequences of occupation, with older structures sleeping beneath later temples, streets, and houses. Research from major American university teams has shown that famous cities often grew on deep foundations of earlier settlement. That fact is simple. Its feeling is not. You kneel near a trench cut into the mound. Its wall shows bands of colour: brown, grey, pale yellow, black and ash. Each band is a moment flattened into geology. One line may be a fire, Another may be a rebuilt floor. Another may be the quiet rubbish of meals, swept away by people who had no idea they were helping future scholars. History can be very untidy. A broken jar handle sticks from the soil. A fragment of wall plaster gleams faintly. Small bones appear in a pocket of dirt. None of it explains itself. The trench is not a story. It is a stack of unfinished sentences. You lean closer, and the air inside the cut feels cooler. Cities beneath cities change the mystery. They show that civilization is not a single grand arrival. It is replacement without complete erasure. The new house stands because the old house collapsed. The new shrine is holy partly because the old shrine was holy. The new name shines because older names have faded beneath it. The past does not disappear. It becomes ground. A quirky fringe tidbit often grows around these buried layers. Some writers imagine that the lowest levels of ancient sites hide sealed chambers from a vanished world, perhaps containing tablets from the first teachers or maps of an earlier Earth. Most excavations have produced far humbler treasures, such as pottery, bricks, bones, and administrative debris. Humble things rarely trend well, sadly. Yet humble things can be devastating. A potsherd can prove continuity, a floor can show rebuilding, a seal impression can reveal administration, a layer of flood silt can mark catastrophe. You do not always need a golden library. Sometimes a dirty line in a trench changes the shape of memory. You walk along the edge of the excavation as late sunlight turns the mound amber. The workers have gone. Tools rest beside the trench. A canvas flap moves softly in the breeze. In the silence, the ancient site feels less abandoned than paused. Somewhere below, earlier streets remain. Not streets in the modern sense, with neat signs and offended drivers. Narrow ways between houses, packed with dust, refuse, conversation, and the smell of animals. People pass through them carrying water, bread, baskets, tools, and gossip. Especially gossip. No civilization has ever lacked that powerful technology. Among scholars, debate continues over how early urban growth unfolded in southern Mesopotamia. Some researchers emphasize temple institutions and organized labor. Others point to trade, environmental pressure, population growth, and household economies. The city was probably not born from one cause. It was brewed slowly from many pressures. You descend into imagination, layer by layer. At the upper level, a temple stands tall, whitewashed and visible from far away. Priests oversee offerings. Scribes count goods. Workers move in disciplined lines. The city knows its own importance. Below that, another temple stands smaller. Its walls are rougher. Its ceremonies may differ. Its god may be known by another name, or by a form later absorbed into a grander figure. The people here do not feel earlier. They feel complete to themselves. Below that, there is a village. Houses cluster near water. A shrine room holds vessels and figurines. Grain is stored carefully. Children sleep near walls that will become archaeology. No one dreams of being prehistoric. They simply need the roof repaired before the next storm. Lower still. There may be occupation so faint it becomes almost a trace. Hearths, pits, trampled floors, scattered tools, a life thinly written into soil. This is where the idea of what came before becomes physical. Not a theory floating above the desert, but a vertical reality. The deeper you go, the less familiar the world becomes. Written names vanish. Royal claims vanish. Famous gods blur. Yet human intention remains. A wall was placed there. A fire burned there. Someone returned there. You pause beside the lowest visible band. It is darker than the rest, rich with organic matter. The smell is earthy and faintly sour. Your fingertips come away dusted with ancient soil. For a moment, you feel the weight of all the floors above it, all the certainty that later people built on top. The Anunnaki belong to the written and mythic heights of this landscape. Yet the mound says the sacred structure below them was already deep. Each layer suggests that later divine systems grew from older urban memories, and older urban memories grew from village habits, and village habits grew from still earlier needs. The famous city is only the visible crest. The hidden past is the mound itself. A mainstream detail steadies the scene. At Eridu, excavators uncovered a sequence of temples built one above another, suggesting long religious continuity at the site. Scholars have often treated Eridu as a key place for understanding early southern Mesopotamian sacred architecture. Its layers feel almost like a sermon in mud brick. Build, decay, return, build again. You stand there as the sky darkens. The trench wall loses colour, becoming one shadowed face. Cricket starts singing among the grass. Somewhere far off, a dog barks, and the sound feels strangely modern. The city beneath the city is not just underground. It is inside every later claim of origin. When a king says his rule is ancient, he stands on buried floors. When a priest serves a god, the sanctuary may rest on older rites. When a myth speaks of first times, the soil beneath it may contain many firsts already. This is the unsettling softness of deep history. Every beginning is crowded. The zero civilization, if it has any earthly shape, might resemble these hidden levels more than a single lost capital. It may be the accumulated depth beneath visible civilization. The unnamed builders, the first shrine keepers, the canal diggers, the families who rebuilt on the same mound because leaving would mean surrendering memory. You look out from the mound across the plain. Night gathers in the low places first. The river reflects the last light. The wind cools and carries the smell of damp reeds. You can almost sense the buried city breathing beneath your feet. Not awake, not dead, simply present. And as the stars emerge, you understand why ancient people built upward on old ground. To rise, they needed depth. To claim a beginning, they needed ruins. To name the gods, they needed older silence beneath the names. The cities beneath the cities remain there, pressed into darkness, holding up everything that pretends to be first. The builders without statues leave you almost nothing that looks like a face. No calm royal eyes stare from polished stone. No carved beard declares authority. No inscription boasts that a mighty ruler crushed enemies, founded cities, and probably looked excellent while doing so. Instead, you find foundations, post holes, wall lines, worn floors, and broken tools. It is not glamorous. It is more intimate. You walk through a half-exposed structure near the edge of an ancient mound. The walls rise only to your ankle, yet their plan remains readable. A doorway opens toward a courtyard. A room narrows near one end. A small hearth stains the earth black. The place feels emptied, but not meaningless. Someone decided where each wall should go. Mainstream archaeology confirms that many early communities in Mesopotamia left far more architecture than personal imagery. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania and Chicago have shown that before royal portraiture became common, social identity often appears through buildings, pottery, seals, and burial patterns. The people are hidden, but their choices remain. That is the strange mercy of ruins. A person can vanish completely while their doorway survives. You step across the threshold and feel the ground change beneath your feet. Inside, the earth is smoother, packed by years of movement. Outside, it is rougher and scattered with fragments. Even without a roof, the house still teaches your body where inside begins. The absent builders speak through boundaries. Here is the storage space. Here is the cooking place. Here is the work area. Here is the corner kept cleaner than the rest. Perhaps because it held something valued, feared, or honoured. The builders do not show you their faces. They show you how they moved through life. A quirky fringe tidbit follows quietly. Some alternative writers call these faceless builders the first architects of divine civilization, imagining a priestly caste that deliberately avoided portraits to hide its identity. It is an elegant suspicion, rather dramatic in a candlelit sort of way. Yet ordinary explanations are often stronger. Many early people simply did not create monuments centered on individuals. Their world may have valued place over portrait. That thought changes the mood. Modern minds like faces. We want founders, heroes, villains, geniuses, and one suspicious man holding all the secrets. Ancient foundations suggest something less convenient. Civilization may have been built by coordinated anonymity. People whose names were never written shape the world before famous rulers arrive to take the better seats. Very human, unfortunately. You bend near a line of bricks. Each one was formed by hand, pressed into a mould, dried in the sun, and carried into position. Mud brick is humble, but it can build temples, houses, platforms, and whole cities. It holds the print of fingers more faithfully than stone holds arrogance. A brick remembers pressure. A statue remembers display. Among scholars, debate continues over how much early architecture reflects communal labour rather than centralised command. Some historians at Cambridge argue that large projects imply strong organisation, while others caution that communities can coordinate impressive work without kings. The question remains open, because ancient mud is annoyingly unwilling to sign administrative documents. You continue into a larger building. Its rooms are arranged with care. Some doorways restrict movement. Some spaces are more accessible than others. The layout itself creates hierarchy. You do not need a throne to feel authority here. Architecture can guide bodies more quietly than a command. You pass from light into shade. The air cools. A faint smell of mineral dust rises from the floor. Lizards move along the wall stubs. The sun outside is bright, but inside the ruin, the shadows hold their shape like old thoughts. You begin to understand that the builders without statues may have mastered a deeper kind of permanence. They built habits into space. A narrow passage makes people slow down. A raised threshold makes them step carefully. A hidden room protects stored goods or sacred objects. A courtyard gathers labour and conversation. A platform lifts one place above another, turning height into meaning. Before gods are sculpted in form, space can already behave divinely. This matters for the hidden timeline. If an earlier cultural order existed beneath remembered myth, it may not have announced itself through faces. It may have survived as plans, alignments, building techniques, and repeated arrangements. Later people could inherit these without knowing the first hands that made them. The builder disappears. The pattern remains. You stand in a room where broken pottery clusters near one wall. There are bowls, jars, and small cups, all shattered and pressed into the floor. Perhaps the room was abandoned suddenly. Perhaps the vessels broke over decades. Perhaps someone cleaned badly. A tradition older than civilization itself. Still, the distribution tells a story. A household stored food. A shrine received offerings. A workshop shaped goods. Each pattern of fragments reveals behaviour. Not names, not faces, but behaviour. The builders without statues become visible through repeated need. They are not silent because they had nothing to say. They are silent because their language was use. A mainstream fact deepens the scene. In early Mesopotamian sites, cylinder seals and stamp seals often reveal social administration before personal portraiture dominates. These tiny objects marked ownership, control, and identity through symbols rather than realistic faces. The self existed, but not always in the modern theatrical style. A person could be represented by a sign, a household by an impression, an institution by repeated imagery. You imagine a seal rolling across wet clay. Its pattern appears in miniature, animals, lines, perhaps human figures, perhaps symbolic scenes. The image repeats perfectly, like authority becoming a rhythm. No statue is needed. The mark says enough. The hidden builders preferred impressions. That phrase feels right. They impressed clay, shaped land, guided water, and raised platforms. They impressed later culture without standing proudly in its front row. Their anonymity is not emptiness. It is a different kind of presence. You leave the building and walk toward a low rise. The sun is descending now, softening the edges of the ruins. Every wall casts a long, thin shadow. From above, the settlement plan becomes clearer. Houses cluster around open spaces. Lanes bend. Work areas sit near storage rooms. The living pattern appears like a faded map. No single face rules the view. The whole place does. This is where the idea of a zero civilization becomes less like fantasy and more like a question about recognition. What counts as a civilization? Must it leave statues? Must it name kings? Must it carve victories into stone? Or can it exist as an organised world whose builders are known only through the spaces they made possible? You stand still as the evening wind cools your skin. The answer is not simple. History often favours those who write, carve, conquer, and commission flattering images. The earlier builders were not granted that luxury, or perhaps they did not need it. They remain beneath later glory, supporting it with mud brick hands. The great divine names will eventually rise above such foundations. The Anunnaki will enter tablets, hymns, lists, and speculation. Yet beneath their written world are these faceless makers, arranging Earth into meaningful forms. They are not gods. They are not legends. They are the ones who prepared the room where legend could sit down. As darkness gathers, the ruin loses detail. Doorways become black rectangles. Walls become low shadows. The whole settlement seems to sink back into the ground. You feel no dramatic revelation, only the deep calm of recognition. Some of history's most important people left no portraits, only foundations, and perhaps that is why they feel so close, as if they have stepped aside rather than vanished, allowing you to walk through the spaces they shaped and listen to the silence where their names should be. The strange mathematics of origins begins in a room where numbers are not yet abstract. They smell of grain, wool, beer, and warm clay. You can feel them in the weight of a basket, in the depth of a jar, in the length of a canal bank measured by tired feet under the sun. A counting board rests on a low table. Beside it sit small clay tokens, rounded, pointed, flattened, and marked. They look modest, almost playful, like objects a child might collect and immediately misplace. Yet these little shapes hold a serious power. They allow memory to leave the body and sit outside it. That changes everything. Mainstream research from the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard confirms that early Mesopotamian accounting systems helped prepare the way for writing. Tokens, sealed containers, numerical signs, and ration lists reveal a world learning to count labour, goods, and time with increasing precision. The first mathematics was not dreamy. It was practical, hungry, and deeply social. You listen to the room. Someone is counting barley. Someone is assigning workers. Someone is measuring oil. Someone is checking whether the amount promised matches the amount received. The process is calm, repetitive, and slightly menacing, because numbers make excuses harder. A jar cannot argue well. A token cannot flatter anyone. In this world, number becomes a form of trust, but also a form of control. It tells the granary how much has entered. It tells the temple how much can be given. It tells workers what they are owed, or what someone powerful says they are owed. Mathematics begins with memory, then quickly discovers authority. That is rather efficient of it. You step closer to the table. The tokens cast tiny shadows in the lamplight. A cone may mean one kind of measure. A sphere may mean another. A mark on clay may stand for a quantity no human eye can hold at once. Slowly, number rises from counting things into managing systems. The hidden timeline gains another layer. Before divine genealogies are arranged, before cosmic councils are listed, people are already organizing reality through sequence, measure, and repetition. The world becomes countable. Once it becomes countable, it can be compared, predicted, scheduled, and made sacred. Calendars grow from hunger and sky. The moon fattens and thins. Rivers rise and fall. Fields need timing, festivals need dates, debts need due days, births, deaths, planting, harvesting, and offerings all press the mind towards cycles. A quirky fringe tidbit hovers nearby. Some alternative writers claim that sacred numbers in Mesopotamian tradition preserve a mathematical code from an older lost civilization. They point to large reign numbers, base 60 counting, and astronomical cycles as fragments of primeval science. The claim is larger than the evidence, but the fascination has roots in something real. Mesopotamian mathematics was genuinely remarkable. Its sexagesimal system, based on 60 shaped later ways of measuring time and circles. That old habit still touches your life every time an hour divides into 60 minutes, and each minute into 60 seconds. Ancient counting sits quietly inside the modern clock, pretending not to be impressive. It is impressive, also slightly smug. Among scholars, debate continues over why base 60 became so durable in Mesopotamia. Some emphasize its practical divisibility, since 60 can be divided neatly by many numbers. Others point to older counting traditions, trade practices, or combinations of decimal and dozen-based systems. The full origin remains uncertain, which is exactly the kind of gap where imagination likes to stretch its legs. You look upward through a roof opening. Stars appear one by one. The sky is a vast counting problem with no edge. Ancient observers did not need telescopes to notice order. Certain stars returned with seasons. The moon followed phases. Planets moved oddly against the fixed background. To watch them carefully was to feel that the heavens had habits. Habits invite numbers. Numbers invite prediction. Prediction begins to resemble power. You stand in a courtyard where a priestly official watches the new moon. Around him, others wait. The first visible crescent matters. It can mark a month, a festival, a duty, a beginning. The sky has become part of administration, and administration has become part of the sacred order. This is where mathematics begins to feel older than the gods. Not older in the sense of symbols written before divine names, but older as a mental structure. Human beings meet a dangerous world and search for regularity. They find it in grain measures, moon phases, river levels, and repeated rituals. Later, myths may describe gods fixing destinies and arranging cosmic laws. Beneath that poetry lies the lived experience of pattern. The world repeats, therefore the world can be read. You walk toward a storage hall where tally marks cover a tablet. Each mark is plain, yet together they create a little universe of obligation. The tablet knows who worked. It knows what was issued. It knows which group received rations. It may know more than some tired supervisor remembers, which must have been annoying. Clay becomes an external mind. That external mind allows institutions to grow beyond face-to-face memory. A village can remember through elders. A city needs records. A temple economy needs quantities, categories, and trained readers. Without numbers, complexity leaks away. A mainstream fact settles firmly here. Mesopotamian scribal schools trained students in lexical lists, numerical tables, measures, and problem texts. Later mathematical tablets show sophisticated calculation, including geometry and reciprocal tables. These were not idle puzzles alone. They belonged to a culture where measurement supported land, labour, building, and exchange. You can almost hear the students groan. Some things never change. A boy copies a table by lamplight, fighting sleep. His teacher corrects a sign. Outside, the city darkens. Inside, the young mind is being trained to see the world as ordered quantities. He may never question why 60 matters. He inherits the system as if it had always existed. That is how deep structures survive. They become obvious. The zero civilization, imagined through mathematics, becomes the possibility of an older system of measures beneath the visible record. Not necessarily a secret science from vanished masters, but an inherited grammar of counting, timing, and dividing the world. A grammar so useful that later cultures absorbed it without preserving its first speakers. The earliest known record is not always the earliest practice. A measure can be older than the tablet that names it. A calendar can be older than the hymn that blesses it. A ritual number can be older than the god assigned to it. You pause beside a wall where shadow and lamplight divide the room cleanly. The division itself seems mathematical, half seen, half hidden. The ancient world loved such divisions, perhaps because life demanded them. Wet and dry, pure and impure, temple and street, human and divine, before and during, are full and empty. Numbers gave those divisions shape. They did not remove mystery, they disciplined it. This may be the strangest lesson of the old counting room. Mathematics does not make the world less sacred. For Mesopotamian minds, order could deepen awe. A predictable moon did not mean an empty heaven. It meant the heavens kept appointments. How civilized of them. You return to the tokens on the table. In their silence, they feel almost older than language. Small clay bodies holding categories, simple forms carrying invisible agreements. No statue watches them, no myth explains them. Yet without them, the later splendor of temples, lists, and cosmic hierarchies becomes harder to imagine. The lamp flickers. A token rolls slightly, then stops. The sound is tiny, but in the quiet room it feels enormous. A small object settles into place, and with it the sense that civilization begins when the world can be repeated in signs. 1 sheep, 10 jars, 30 workers, 12 months, 60 parts, a cycle, a return. Perhaps the first hidden order was not a throne. Perhaps it was a count, and somewhere beneath the names of gods, beneath the claims of kings, beneath the flood stretched into mythic time, the old numbers continue their patient work, dividing darkness into portions human minds can almost hold. Your mind drifts into a darker margin of the ancient world, where memory becomes rumour, and rumour grows wings. The night is cool now. The stars look sharp enough to cut the sky. Wind slides over the plain, touching reeds, rooftops, and the black mouths of old wells. You hear no voices at first. Then, very faintly, you imagine watchers, not the familiar gods of later tablets, seated in ordered rank and wrapped in sacred office. These are stranger presences, half felt in thresholds, hilltops, storms, and dreams. They do not yet speak from official hymns. They seem to stand at the edge of human settlement, where firelight fails and the dark begins its own thinking. Mainstream history confirms that ancient Mesopotamian religion included many divine and semi-divine beings beyond the best-known gods. Scholars at Oxford and Yale have studied protective spirits, demons, local powers, and supernatural agents that filled the invisible world of early communities. The sacred landscape was crowded, but not always orderly. That crowd matters. A world with many unseen beings can preserve older layers of belief inside later systems. Some powers become gods, some become monsters, some become servants, some become warnings whispered near beds, doors, and sick rooms. The leftovers of belief are rarely quiet. You walk beside a mud brick wall where small protective objects have been placed near a doorway. The air smells of ashes, wool, and bitter herbs. A lamp burns in a niche. Its flame trembles whenever the wind finds a crack. Someone has marked this threshold carefully because thresholds are nervous places. Inside is human warmth. Outside is everything else. A quirky fringe tidbit gathers here like mist. Some alternative traditions speak of watchers before the watchers, beings who observed humanity before the later gods claimed order. They are imagined as instructors, guardians, or ancient survivors from a forgotten age. Evidence does not confirm such beings as history, but the idea reflects a real ancient anxiety. People often felt watched by stars, by ancestors, by spirits, by the dead, by gods not yet fully named. The sensation of being observed may be one of the oldest religious feelings, because survival depends on noticing eyes in the dark. Sometimes there are eyes, sometimes there is only fear. Among scholars, Debate continues over whether early supernatural beings represented herited prehistoric beliefs, local ritual needs, or literary creations shaped by scribal culture. Researchers at Chicago and Harvard have argued in different ways that these figures cannot be reduced to one source. They are social, psychological, ritual, and poetic at once. The ancient night is not tidy. You move toward the edge of the settlement. Behind you, fires glow through reed walls. Ahead, the marsh opens into black water and shifting sound. Frogs call. Birds stir. Something slips through reeds with a soft dragging motion. The smell is green, damp, and slightly rotten. The boundary feels alive. This is where watchers belong, not necessarily in the sky alone, but in the places where human control weakens. The marsh watches because it hides paths and bodies. The desert watches because it gives nothing away. The mountains watch from far beyond the plain, holding stone, timber, metals, and unknown peoples. To live in Mesopotamia is to know dependence. Everything essential comes through negotiation. Water must be managed. Trade must be maintained. Labour must be organised. The unseen must be appeased. Even distant lands, supplying stone and metal, become part of a sacred geography. The world beyond the city is not empty. It is populated by danger, wealth, and imagination. You look upward, the stars remain fixed, or seem to. Their stillness is unsettling. They appear less like decoration and more like witnesses. Ancient observers saw patterns there, signs there, returning rhythms there. The sky watched because people watched the sky. That exchange deepened over centuries. A mainstream fact steadies the shadows. Mesopotamian scholars later developed rich traditions of celestial observation and omen interpretation, preserving records that influenced astronomy for generations. Although these later systems are far more developed than early village beliefs, they grew from the ancient habit of reading the world as meaningful. Meaning is the oldest surveillance system, rather efficient, rather exhausting. You sit near a low fire where elders speak in careful tones. They tell of beings that move at night, of illnesses sent by unseen forces, of protective figures placed beneath floors and near doors. No one calls this superstition. That word belongs to people who often forget their own rituals, passwords, insurance forms, and lucky routines. The listeners understand the lesson. The world has layers. Some layers are visible: mud, water, grain, animals, houses, bodies. Other layers press against the visible one: dreams, omens, ancestral memory, sacred prohibition, sudden illness. The watchers live in that pressure. Before the famous divine council becomes clear, these lesser-known presences may have carried older religious material. They guarded spaces. They threatened disorder. They explained misfortune. They stood between human beings and forces too diffuse for grand myth. The hidden timeline grows crowded, not with one lost race, but with many kinds of presence: older spirits, local guardians, household powers, dangerous beings, ancestral echoes, and divine names not yet promoted into literary fame. The sacred world is less like a pyramid and more like a marsh, filled with channels, reeds, hidden movements, and soft ground. You must step carefully. A small figurine rests near a wall, worn smooth by time. It may have been protective. It may have belonged to a ritual deposit. Its features are simple, almost abstract. It does not explain whether it represents a spirit, a person, a guardian, or a memory. It simply waits, which is a very ancient talent. Your hand hovers near it. The clay is cold. The watchers before the watchers might be understood through such objects, not as proven beings, but as traces of an older need to people the invisible. Humans did not wait for official theology before defending themselves against the unknown. They made charms, gestures, rules, stories, and watchful images. They filled darkness with witnesses. Perhaps this is what later myths refined. A vague presence becomes a named guardian, a household fear becomes a demon in a text, a local power becomes a servant of a greater god, a star becomes an omen becomes a discipline. The old watchers do not vanish. They receive job titles. You smile softly at that, because bureaucracy reaches even heaven eventually. The fire lowers, sparks rise and disappear. Around you, the settlement sleeps uneasily, as all ancient settlements must. The walls are thin. The night is large. Illness can enter without knocking. So can flood, stranger, snake, fever, or dream. People create protection because they know they are porous. The body is a doorway. The house is a doorway. The city is a doorway. Every doorway needs a watcher. You turn back toward the star, and their cold brightness feels less distant now. They are not the answer, but they are part of the question. Before the Anunnaki stand in later tradition, the human imagination already senses observers at every edge of the life, some above, some below, some at the door, some inside the dream. The hidden truth is not that ancient people knew less than you, it is that they noticed different things. They noticed vulnerability with terrifying clarity. They noticed patterns in illness, weather, birth, and death. They noticed that fear becomes more bearable when given a shape. And once fear has a shape, it can be addressed. The watchers are those shapes. Night deepens across the marsh. Water reflects the stars, making it seem as if the sky has fallen into the reeds. For a moment, above and below become difficult to separate. The watchers may be in heaven. They may be in water. They may be only in the human need to never feel entirely alone in the dark. And perhaps that's enough. Because long before the great gods receive their full names, something is already watching from the threshold, waiting for humanity to notice, and waiting even longer to be remembered. Humanity enters the story late, almost apologetically, as if arriving after the room has already been arranged. The rivers are flowing, the fields are marked, the sky has its cycles, the shrines have their thresholds. The unseen powers are already present, whether named, half-named, or only felt in the skin during silence. You stand at dawn beside a field. The soil is dark from recent watering, and the first light spreads gently across its furrows. Bare feet sink into mud with a soft pulling sound. A wooden tool scrapes the ground. Birds lift from the reeds and scatter toward the pale horizon. The air smells of wet earth, sweat, and crushed green stalks. This is not an empty world awaiting people. It is a demanding world that has found them. Mainstream research from universities such as Oxford and Chicago confirms that early Mesopotamian society depended on organized labor, irrigation, farming, herding, and storage. Human beings were not merely living beside the rivers, they were reshaping them, maintaining channels, repairing banks, and turning landscape into obligation. The field is not natural anymore, it is negotiated. You watch workers move in lines, bending, lifting, carrying, returning. No one looks heroic, they look tired, practical, and necessary. This is often where civilization hides its true engine, not in crowns or myths, but in aching backs and repeated tasks. A person brings water, a person clears silt, a person plants grain, a person does it again. In later Mesopotamian creation stories, humans are sometimes made to relieve divine labor. The gods grow weary, the work becomes heavy, and humanity appears as a solution that is both sacred and suspiciously convenient. It is a magnificent cosmic explanation for why someone else is always asking you to work. Ancient people understood management, perhaps too well. A quirky fringe tidbit circles this idea. Some alternative writers claim that humanity was created by older beings as a servant species, long before the Anunnaki became the named masters of later myth. They read ancient labor stories as literal records of engineered workers. Scholars do not accept that as historical proof, yet the mythic theme is real and striking. Humans are imagined as useful. That is unsettling. Not loved first, not crowned first, useful first, made to carry baskets, tend fields, maintain temples, offer food, and support the divine order. The idea feels strange, but also familiar. Many societies have explained labour as destiny, duty, punishment, honour, or sacred service. Work loves a noble story. Among scholars, debate continues over whether these creation myths reflect temple ideology, social hierarchy, older ritual memory, or philosophical reflection on human suffering. Researchers at Yale and Harvard have explored how myth can naturalize labour while also asking why life requires so much toil. The debate remains open because clay tablets rarely provide author interviews. You walk beside the workers as the sun rises. The heat arrives quickly. It settles on shoulders and necks. A fly lands on your wrist. Someone laughs at a private joke. Because even under cosmic obligation, people still manage to be ridiculous. Someone else curses the mud under their breath, probably in a way that would not make it into formal hymn. The field becomes a temple of necessity. Every canal must be kept open. Every crop depends on timing. Every storehouse depends on trust. Human beings enter the ancient order not as spectators, but as maintainers. Without them, the sacred economy falters. Offerings stop. Fields fail. Cities thin. Gods, temples, rulers, and households all depend on labour moving through the day like breath. This is humanity's role in the hidden timeline. Not first, essential. You kneel near a water channel and press your fingers into its wall. The mud is cool, slick, and fragile. A small break could widen, a neglected canal could choke. The land requires attention, and attention requires community. One person cannot hold back a river system forever, which is inconvenient for anyone hoping to be the main character. Civilization forces cooperation. Cooperation creates hierarchy. Hierarchy seeks meaning. Meaning becomes myth. A mainstream fact anchors the scene. Early administrative tablets record rations for workers, including barley and beer. These records show labour organised through institutions long before royal literature fully explains the human place in cosmic terms. The tablets are practical, but behind them lives the same question. Why do humans serve? The myths answer from above. The rationalists answer from below. You follow a group carrying baskets toward a raised building. Their footsteps thud softly on packed earth. The baskets are heavy with grain. Dust clings to their legs. A supervisor counts. A scribe watches. The temple receives. In this moment, the divine world and the labour world meet without ceremony. Grain grown by human hands becomes offering. Offering sustains the sacred household. Sacred authority returns order, blessing, legitimacy, and perhaps a little fear, because fear keeps the shelves properly arranged. The cycle closes, then begins again. You sense why humans appear late in mythic time. The world of powers, waters, skies, and laws seems older than the human body. People are fragile, hungry, and brief. Yet they carry the burden of maintaining something far older than themselves. Their lateness does not make them irrelevant. It makes them responsible. That responsibility can feel heavy. It can also feel holy. The hidden truth about a possible zero civilization touches humanity here. If there were earlier systems before the named gods, humans may have inherited roles already shaped by ancient institutions. The myth of creation for labour may preserve not a literal workshop of beings, but a deep social memory. People entered a structured world and were told the structure needed them. That message has never really left. You stand in the shade of a reed shelter at midday. The smell of bread drifts from a nearby oven. Someone pours thick beer into a cup. Children chase one another around stacked jars until an adult interrupts, because apparently civilization also requires preventing children from destroying storage systems. The ordinary and cosmic sit together. A woman wipes mud from her hands and looks toward the field. Her expression is unreadable. She may be thinking of food, debt, family, heat, a sick relative, or nothing grand at all. Yet through her work, The entire sacred order continues. History often forgets her name. The system does not forget her labour. You look across the fields as sunlight trembles above the wet soil. The landscape is human-made now, but not human-owned entirely. The river still threatens. The sky still withholds or gives. Insects still arrive. Illness still enters. The divine order, if it exists, still demands maintenance. Humanity stands between dependence and control. That is a difficult place. Perhaps ancient myths made people from clay because clay was everywhere, useful, shapeable, and humble. It could become brick, tablet, jar, figurine, seal, wall, and grave covering. Clay could hold a city and remember a name. To say humans are clay is not only to diminish them, it is to place them inside the material heart of Mesopotamia. You are earth that works, earth that remembers, earth that questions why it was given hands. Evening begins to soften the field. The workers return along the canal path, carrying tools and empty baskets. The sky turns pink above the water. Frogs begin their patient song. Smoke rises from houses, and the smell of cooked grain settles into the air. No clear answer arrives, only the rhythm of service, rest, and return. Humanity may be late in the story, but once present, it becomes impossible to remove. The gods require offerings, the fields require bodies, the cities require repair, the myths require listeners, the tablets require hands. You stand there in the dimming light, feeling both small and strangely central. The ancient order may have preceded humanity, but humanity becomes its keeper, its servant, its witness, and finally its storyteller. And perhaps that is why the old texts feel so haunting. They do not merely ask where people came from. They ask what people were for. The scent of bread and wet clay follows you into the temple courtyard, where labour becomes offering, and offering becomes a language addressed to powers beyond sight. The morning is pale and cool. Smoke rises in narrow threads from ovens. A line of workers waits beside baskets of grain, jars of beer, and bundles of reeds tied with careful knots. Everything here has weight. Everything here has purpose. You stand close enough to hear breathing, sandals shifting, and the soft creak of rope handles under strain. A scribe sits near the entrance, stylus ready, eyes lowered to the clay. He does not look inspired. He looks busy. Sacred administration, apparently, still requires paperwork. Records from early Mesopotamian tablets confirm that temples received goods, assigned labour, and distributed rations. Research from Yale and the University of Pennsylvania shows that religious institutions were deeply involved in economic life. The sacred world did not float above society. It ate from its fields. That fact changes the myth. When creation stories speak of humans made to serve divine needs, they may echo a world where labour, temple, food, and cosmic order were inseparable. The gods require offerings. The temple requires workers. Workers require rations. Rations require fields. Fields require canals. Canals require more workers. The circle tightens quietly. You walk beside a man carrying a basket of barley against his hip. Dust clings to his skin. His shoulders shine with sweat. He has probably not spent the morning pondering metaphysics. Still, his movement belongs to a sacred system older than his own life. The basket is practical. The basket is also theological. A quirky fringe tidbit appears at the edge of the courtyard. Some speculative writers claim ancient creation myths preserve memories of beings who designed humans for labour in a vanished age. They imagine clay as a symbol of biological crafting by older powers. Scholars do not accept that as evidence, but the image remains powerful because the myths do describe humans as made, shaped, and assigned. The unsettling part is the assignment. Humans are given work almost immediately, not leisure, not endless wisdom, not a gentle retirement beside the river with snacks. Work. The ancient imagination is refreshingly direct, and perhaps a little rude. Among scholars, Debate continues over whether these labour myths were composed to justify temple economies, explain human suffering, or reflect older ritual ideas about life force and clay. Researchers at Oxford and Harvard have treated such stories as layered texts, where politics, theology, and human anxiety meet. The clay figure is never only clay. You enter a cool inner room, the light narrows, the smell changes from dust and bread to oil, incense, and stored grain. Bowls rest on low stands. A woven mat lies before a raised place. The silence here feels pressed flat, like a hand smoothing wet clay before the first mark. A priest lifts bread. A cup is poured. The gesture is small, but everyone moves as if the world depends on it. Perhaps in their minds, it does. Food offered upward keeps the cosmic household functioning. The invisible powers receive respect. The visible community receives order, identity, and a reason for the endless work. This is divine need. Not need like hunger alone, but need as relationship. Gods need recognition. Temples need maintenance. Fields need blessing. Humans need meaning for effort that would otherwise feel unbearable. The system binds them together until no part can easily be removed. You feel the strange tenderness of it. Humanity is burdened, yet also necessary. The creation stories do not place people outside the sacred order. They place them inside its machinery. Humans are not merely accidental creatures wandering under a large sky. They are workers, singers, mourners, builders, feeders, record keepers, and witnesses. They maintain the bridge between clay and heaven. That is a heavy honour. It is still heavy. A mainstream fact rests quietly in the background. Mesopotamian myths often describe gods forming humans from clay, mixed with divine substance or life-giving force. This image connects human fragility with sacred origin. People are lowly material, yet animated by something beyond ordinary earth. Clay alone cracks. Breath changes everything. You step outside again, where sunlight falls hard across the courtyard. Workers receive portions from large jars. Barley is measured, beer is poured, names or groups are recorded. The scribe presses signs into clay with a rhythm as steady as rain. The sound is soft. Press, lift, press, lift. The tablet becomes a record of bodies translated into numbers. It knows labour without knowing exhaustion. It knows rations without tasting hunger. It knows the system, not the soul. Yet the soul is there. It is in the woman rubbing her wrist after lifting jars. It is in the boy watching the scribe with envy or dread. It is in the old worker who knows exactly where the shade will fall by midday. It is in the half-smile shared when a supervisor turns away. Humanity's role is never only what institutions say it is. People serve, but they also remember, joke, resist, love, mourn, and sing under their breath. They turn obligation into culture. They make beauty inside necessity. A worker hauling mud may still notice the colour of dawn over the canal. That reconstruction too is part of being human. The hidden timeline becomes warmer here, more bodily. If an older order existed before the Anunnaki were fully named, it likely depended on this same exchange between need and meaning. Work had to be organised, food had to be stored, sacred authority had to explain why everyone must return tomorrow and do it again. Myth gives labour a ceiling of stars. It tells the tired body that effort matters beyond the field. Perhaps that is comfort. Perhaps it is control. Perhaps, as usual, it is both. You stand near the temple gate as evening approaches. The day has bent backs, filled tablets, emptied baskets, and darkened the courtyard with footprints. The smell of sweat mixes with incense fading from the inner room. Doves move along the roofline, soft grey shapes against the sun. The divine world seems less distant now. It is not only above. It is in the accounting room, the oven, the canal bank, the storage jar, the saw palm, and the whispered prayer before sleep. Humans were created in these stories, not to escape Earth, but to keep Earth joined to order. That may be the deepest unease. To be human is to be useful to powers you do not fully understand. Yet it is also to ask questions those powers never quite answer. The courtyard empties slowly. A forgotten grain stalk lies near your foot. You pick it up and feel its dry roughness between your fingers. It is small, breakable, and ordinary. Still, entire systems rise around such things. Bread for humans, bread for gods, bread for the story that explains why hands must work. The last light settles on the temple wall. The mud brick glows briefly, then dulls. Somewhere inside, vessels are being put away for another day. The work will return with the sun, as it always does. And in that returning, you understand the old creation not as a single event, but as a daily condition. Humanity is made again each morning by labour, breath, hunger, duty, and the quiet hope that service has meaning. The archive beneath myth is not a room at first. It is a feeling, a pressure under the story, like a buried wall felt through the soles of your feet. You enter a place where tablets rest in rows, but the deeper record is not only written, it is hidden in repetition, image, ritual, and the strange survival of old fears. The air is dry and still. A lamp glows beside a shelf of clay fragments. Some tablets are whole enough to read, others are broken into edges, corners, and wounded middles. The missing parts seem almost louder than the surviving words, which is rude of them, but very effective. Mainstream research from Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago confirms that Mesopotamian myths survive through scribal copying, temple traditions, and later literary collections. These stories were not frozen fossils. They were shaped by schools, politics, theology, and memory across long periods of time. A myth is not simple. It is an archive wearing a mask. You hold a fragment in your mind. A god speaks, a flood comes, a human is formed, a city receives destiny. These images are not random ornaments. They are containers. Each one may hold older concerns about labour, authority, disaster, fertility, death, and the frightening need for order. The story is the surface. Beneath it, human life continues to murmur. A quirky fringe tidbit lives here quite comfortably. Some writers claim that every ancient myth is a coded historical report from a forgotten world, waiting for modern readers to unlock it. That is too confident, and confidence can be very expensive in history, yet the opposite mistake is also thin. Myths are not empty fantasy. They remember, but strangely. Among scholars, debate continues over how much historical memory ancient myths preserve. Some historians at Stanford treat myth as symbolic structure, while others allow that real floods, migrations, social tensions, and political shifts may echo inside narrative form. The disagreement remains fertile because myth does not label its own ingredients, rather inconsiderate. You walk along the shelf and notice how many tablets are copies of older copies. A student learns by repeating, a priest preserves by reciting, a scribe corrects, changes, smooths, or misunderstands. Each act protects the story while also altering it. Memory survives by becoming flexible. That's unsettling, but also beautiful. A rigid memory shatters. A flexible one bends into new language, new gods, new cities, and new purposes. The archive beneath myth is not a locked vault. It is a living river carrying silt from many lands. When it finally settles in clay, you see only the surface deposit. The deeper current has already passed. You sit beside a table where an old scribe reads to a younger one. His voice is low and steady. Outside, rain taps softly on the roof. The younger scribe repeats the line, careful not to stumble. The story moves from mouth to ear to hand, from hand to clay. This is how hidden history travels. Not perfectly, never perfectly. A name may change because a city rises. A goddess may merge with another because cults overlap. A local tale may be fitted into a larger cosmic order. A memory of flood may become the flood. A ruler may become a model for kingship itself. The archive is not lying. It is transforming. You lean closer to a mythic scene where the divine world appears full of conflict and arrangement. Gods argue, assign tasks, establish destinies, and define the human place. On the surface, it is theology. Beneath the surface, you can feel society thinking about itself. Who works? Who commands? Who eats first? Who explains suffering? These questions are old enough to be almost invisible. A mainstream fact deepens the quiet. Mesopotamian scribal education used lists to organize the world, including lists of gods, professions, animals, cities, and materials. This habit of listing shaped how myth could arrange reality. The archive beneath myth is partly a library of categories. The ancient mind sorted existence. Then it sang about the sorting. You smell rain through the doorway now, mingling with clay and smoke. The archive feels less like a dead collection and more like a weather system. Stories gather moisture from lived experience, rise into symbolic clouds, and return as ritual rain. That may sound grand, but ancient people earned grand comparisons by inventing civilization in a swampy furnace. A little respect is reasonable. The hidden timeline becomes more delicate in this archive. What came before the Anunnaki may survive not as a named predecessor, but as older patterns absorbed into their world. Primeval waters, labouring powers, divine assemblies, sacred numbers, flood boundaries, cities chosen by destiny. Each theme may be a fossil of thought from earlier layers, not proof of a single lost empire, proof of deep inheritance. You turn a fragment in lamplight and see a broken sign at the edge. The missing line might have named a god. It might have listed an offering. It might have completed an origin that would settle nothing and complicate everything. Broken clay is excellent at creating suspense. It gives just enough. Then it stops. This is why careful interpretation matters. Myth can preserve memory, but it also creates meaning from anxiety. A flood story may remember floods and also speak about moral order. A creation story may reflect labour systems and also ask why living beings suffer. A divine battle may echo political conflict and also dramatize cosmic balance. One story can carry many bones. You rise and move deeper into the archive, where colder air settles near the floor. Here, the tablets are more fragmentary. Their labels are uncertain. Their origins are sometimes debated. You feel the edge between evidence and desire. The desire is strong. You want one tablet to say plainly that an older civilization ruled before all known gods. You want a clean confession from the clay. Instead, the archive offers hints, patterns, damaged lines, and a silence that keeps its dignity. Perhaps that's more truthful. Ancient history is not a locked puzzle waiting for a clever modern hand. It is a landscape of partial survivals. The archive beneath myth asks you to walk carefully, to let possibility breathe without forcing it into certainty. You stop beside the doorway as rain fades. Outside, the night smells washed and cool. Water drips from the roof edge into a clay basin. Each drop sounds separate, then part of a rhythm. The archive behind you feels the same way. Fragment, 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 pattern. The hidden record is not one voice. It is many quiet voices layered together. Some speak of kings, some speak of gods, some speak of work, fear, disaster, and hope. Some voices are so old that only their shape remains inside later stories. The Anunnaki may stand prominently in the written chamber, but beneath them lies this deeper archive of unnamed concerns. A myth survives because it is useful. It comforts, warns, commands, explains, and unsettles. And perhaps, when it speaks of first things, it also remembers that every first thing has a shadow underneath it. You leave the archive slowly, carrying no final answer, only the sensation that the oldest truths rarely appear naked. They arrive clothed in story, softened by ritual, edited by scribes, and cracked by time. The clay does not reveal everything, but it teaches you how much can hide inside a tale. Your mind drifts beyond the rivers, toward other ancient lands where the same question waits under different skies. The air changes first. The damp reeds of Mesopotamia fade into dry stone. River mist, desert wind, and mountain cold. You sense that the mystery is no longer local. It has begun to travel. You stand beside the Nile at dawn. The water is dark blue, almost black, and the first light touches it like oil on polished stone. Papyrus stalks stir near the bank. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cries over the fields. The scent is different here, richer with wet soil, lotus, and warm sand. Egypt also remembered a time before order. Mainstream research from Oxford and Chicago confirms that early Egyptian religion developed around creation mounds, primeval waters, solar cycles, and divine kingship. Long before later temple walls were carved with elaborate theology, people imagined creation rising from a dark, watery beginning. The first land appears. Order separates itself from formlessness. That sounds familiar. Not identical, but plus familiar. You walk past a shrine where stone is beginning to replace older materials. The people here do not speak with Sumerian voices. Their symbols differ. Their kingship takes another shape. Yet the deep pattern returns. Water before order, sacred authority before ordinary time, and humans placed inside a system they did not invent. A quirky fringe tidbit often links Egypt and Mesopotamia through a vanished teacher culture, claiming that both inherited wisdom from an older global civilization. The evidence does not prove such a grand network, but similarities across ancient cultures do invite careful wonder. Humans facing rivers, stars, death, and kingship often build similar questions. Different lands can dream in related shapes. Among scholars, debate continues over how much early civilizations influenced each other through trade, migration, and shared symbols. Researchers at Yale and Cambridge have shown that contact existed across regions, but they also warn against flattening every similarity into direct borrowing. Some echoes come from exchange, others come from being human under the same sky. You leave the Nile and drift eastward in thought toward the Indus world. There, baked brick cities stand in ordered streets, with drains, wells, platforms, and seals carved with animals and signs. The air smells of dust, kiln smoke, and river clay after heat. The cities feel controlled, planned, and strangely reserved, as if they know something but refuse to speak clearly. No royal boast dominates the walls. No deciphered hymn explains the gods. The Indus script remains undeciphered, and that silence is almost dramatic enough to be impolite. Archaeologists from major universities have confirmed the scale and planning of sites like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, but the inner voices of that civilization remain partly hidden. Here is another kind of zero, not before civilization but before understanding. You walk down a brick street, hearing your own footsteps return from walls baked hard by ancient hands. A well stands near a house. A drain runs beneath the street. The order is practical, almost restrained. It does not shout divine names at you. It arranges water and space with astonishing care. Perhaps this is what an old system can look like without mythology attached. A city can be sacred and silent. A fringe tale sometimes claims the Indus cities were survivors of a flood-drowned civilization, preserving knowledge through urban design rather than texts. Again, proof does not follow the romance, yet the actual achievement is impressive without embellishment. Planned streets, standardized bricks, and water management already speak of deep inherited knowledge. The bricks are doing the talking. You continue toward highlands and deserts where stone circles, burial mounds, and ancient pathways mark older human attention. Not every pattern belongs to a state. Not every sacred order becomes a city. In many lands, memory gathers around mountains, springs, caves, tombs, and seasonal gatherings. Civilization is not only walls, it is also rhythm. Mainstream archaeology across the ancient Near East shows that long-distance exchange connected communities before and during the rise of cities. Obsidian, shells, metals, timber, lapis, and ideas moved through networks of traders, migrants, and artisans. No city was truly alone, however proudly it behaved. That matters for the hidden timeline. If Mesopotamian myth contains older fragments, those fragments may not all be local. Some may have travelled with goods. A seal design crosses distance. A flood memory follows river people. A sacred animal becomes a symbol in another land. A number system, craft technique, or ritual gesture moves quietly from hand to hand. The world was larger than any one temple, and smaller than modern maps suggest. You stand at a caravan path under a violet evening sky. Donkeys shift their weight, traders check bundles. The air smells of leather, dust, sweat, and dried dates. A piece of blue stone from distant mountains rests in someone's pouch, destined for a city that will treat it as precious. Objects carry stories even when people do not translate them. A bead can outlive its maker. A seal can cross languages. A symbol can arrive stripped of its first meaning, ready to be adopted into another sacred system. This is how echoes form, not always through conquest or grand migration, but through small exchanges, repeated for centuries. The hidden truth becomes wider and gentler. What came before the Anunnaki may include the broader ancient world that shaped the conditions of Sumerian imagination. Marsh villagers, highland traders, desert pastoralists, fisher communities, metal workers, stone cutters, and farmers all contributed to the world that later scribes describe through divine order. No single people owned the beginning. Beginnings are communal things. You look toward Anatolia, where older ritual sites once gathered people before cities became dominant. You think of great stone enclosures and carved animals, studied by international teams, suggesting that ritual complexity could precede full urban life. The lesson is startling but calm. Sacred imagination did not wait politely for agriculture to finish its paperwork. People made meaning early, very early. Among scholars, debate remains active over whether ritual gatherings helped create larger communities, or whether economic stability made ritual complexity possible. Some argue that belief gathered people first. Others answer that food surplus made gathering sustainable. The ancient world, being difficult, may have done both at once. You smile softly at that. The past enjoys refusing our categories. Night settles across all these imagined lands: Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus, highland routes, desert paths, and river plains. Each holds its own origin stories, its own sacred geography, its own memory of waters, darkness, first places, or vanished ancestors. They are not copies of one another. They are neighbours in the human attempt to explain depth. The Anunnaki belong to one tradition, yet the question beneath them belongs to many. Who came first? What order existed before our order? Why do human beings so often imagine that the world was arranged before they arrived? You stand under the shared stars, and the answer remains open. Perhaps these echoes do not prove a lost global civilization. Perhaps they reveal something more intimate and more enduring. Everywhere people gather, they sense that their lives rest on older foundations. The 0 point changes shape in every land. In Egypt, it is a mound rising from waters. In the Indus, it is a silent city of brick and drainage. In the highlands, it is stone, yet animal are in dust gathering. In Mesopotamia, it is clay, flood, labour, and divine memory. The echoes do not solve the mystery. They deepen it. Across the ancient world, humanity keeps finding itself late to a story already underway. And perhaps that is why every civilization, sooner or later, looks behind its gods and wonders who prepared the darkness before the first names were spoken. The lost engineers of time do not enter with hammers, crowns, or thunder. They arrive through calendars, flood marks, star paths, and the careful habit of returning to the same observation again and again. You feel them in the pause before planting, in the waiting for the moon, in the anxious measuring of water against a muddy bank. The night is clear. Above you, the sky is wide and crowded with patient lights. Below, The river glides in darkness, carrying silt from places most people here will never see. A man stands near a post driven into the bank, watching how high the water has climbed. He is not dramatic. He is tired. Still, he is reading time. Mainstream research from universities such as Oxford and Brown confirms that Mesopotamian societies developed sophisticated systems for observing celestial cycles, managing calendars, and recording omens. Later, Babylonian astronomy became famous, but its roots reach back into much older habits of watching sky and season. You stand beside the river watcher. His post is marked with lines. Some are fresh, others are worn. The river has touched them before, and people have remembered what happened when it did. Too low, and fields thirst. Too high, and houses dissolve into brown ruin. The mark is not just measurement, it is warning. Water teaches mathematics with very little kindness. The lost engineers of time may not have been engineers in the modern sense. No steel instruments, no glass observatories, no polite laboratory coats. They were watchers, farmers, priests, scribes, sailors, and supervisors. They built with attention. They made systems from repetition. A calendar is a machine made of memory. A quirky fringe tidbit follows this idea into the starlight. Some speculative writers claim that ancient flood calendars and star records descend from a vanished elder science, preserved by survivors of a forgotten world. The evidence does not confirm such a hidden academy. Yet the fascination makes sense, because ancient timekeeping often feels older than its written explanations. The sky seems to remember. The river seems to answer. You walk toward a flat rooftop where observers wait for the first crescent moon. Their faces are lifted into the dark. No one speaks much. The moment is too delicate. A thin line of silver appears near the horizon, almost imagined before it's seen. Then someone breathes out. The month begins. It is simple, and it is immense. A tiny brightness above the earth decides offerings, payments, duties, journeys, and festivals. The moon becomes a ruler without a throne. Its authority does not require soldiers. It returns, changes, disappears, and returns again. That reliability becomes sacred. Among scholars, debate continues over how early calendar systems balanced lunar months with agricultural seasons. Researchers at Yale and Chicago have explored how practical farming needs, temple rituals, and royal administration shaped the reckoning of time. The system was never only scientific, it was social, economic, and sacred. Time had to be negotiated. You can almost hear the argument. The moon says one thing, the crops say another. The river mutters something unhelpful. The priests need festivals aligned. The farmers need planting to work. The ruler wants order, naturally, and probably credit. So people adjust. They insert days, they watch seasons, they compare records, they argue with the heavens politely, through calculation. This is not superstition in the lazy sense. It is disciplined attention inside a sacred worldview. You move through a room where tablets hold lists of days, offerings, and celestial events. The smell is dry clay, lamp oil, and old dust. A scribe copies a sequence by soft light. His stylus taps and presses. The marks seem small, yet they bind the city to the sky. A tablet can hold tomorrow. That is a strange power. The hidden order of time may be one of the deepest inheritances beneath myth. When stories say that gods fix destinies, they may echo the human discovery that life depends on cycles beyond individual control. Birth, flood, harvest, moon, and death all arrive in patterns. To name those patterns as divine is not ignorance. It is awe with structure. You step outside again. A cold breeze moves over the rooftop. The stars burn steadily. Some rise before dawn during certain seasons. Some vanish into sunlight and return months later. Ancient observers noticed these rhythms not because they were quaint, but because survival rewarded attention. The sky could become a calendar before clay made it permanent. A mainstream fact settles gently here. Mesopotamian astronomical traditions later recorded planetary movements, eclipses, and omens with remarkable care. Those later achievements grew from a long culture of observation, where heavenly events were treated as meaningful signs for king, city, and land. The heavens were not distant decoration. They were administration overhead. That's a little funny, if you're brave enough to laugh under all those stars. The lost engineers of time also worked through festivals. A festival is not merely celebration, it is a scheduled renewal of order. People gather, process, offer, eat, sing, and remember who they are supposed to be. Time becomes something repaired by ritual. The ear can fray. Ritual stitches it. You imagine a procession moving through a city at dusk. Torches burn, drums sound slowly, the smell of incense, wool, sweat, and baked bread mixes in the street. A divine emblem moves along a route already walked many times. Children watch with wide eyes. Elders know when to bow. The route is memory. The date is memory. The movement tells people that the world has not fallen apart yet. Perhaps that is what the oldest time engineers truly made. Not clocks, but reassurance. They taught communities how to pass through uncertainty without dissolving. The flood will come, the moon will return, the festival will be observed, the fields will be opened, the dead will be mourned at the proper time. Order becomes a shared rhythm. The zero civilization, seen through timekeeping, becomes less like a vanished city and more like an inherited discipline. The first forgotten system may have been the ability to bind sky, water, labour, and ritual into a repeating framework. Whoever first did this shaped human imagination permanently. They taught the future how to expect return. You stand beside the river again before dawn. Mist rises from the water. The marked post is pale in the early light. A bird calls once from the reeds. The man who watched the water is gone, but his marks remain. That is how timekeeping works. The watcher passes, the mark stays. The city wakes because older observations survived the night. Bread will be baked, gates will open, workers will move toward canals, scribes will count, priests will prepare offerings. Somewhere, a child will look at the moon and be told it has a meaning. The engineers of time are hidden because their greatest invention became ordinary. Everyone lives inside their work. Every schedule, season, festival, and sacred return bears the ghost of the first people who noticed that the world repeats, but never exactly. Perhaps no elder empire is required. Perhaps the lost engineers were human, patient, and afraid of forgetting. That may be more moving. As sunlight touches the river, the stars fade without truly leaving. Their disappearance is part of the cycle too. Above the city, the sky becomes empty blue, and daily life resumes as if the night had not contained a cosmic machine. Yet you know better now. The machine is still turning. It turns in water levels, in months, in grain, in aging bodies, in tablets drying under shade. It turns beneath the names of gods and beyond the claims of kings. It turns so quietly that entire civilizations can mistake it for the background of life, and perhaps somewhere under the oldest myths. The first hidden order was not a people, but a rhythm. What archaeology refuses to say may be the most honest part of the entire mystery. It does not whisper a simple confession from beneath the sand. It does not lift one perfect tablet from the earth and announce the first civilization with theatrical timing. It gives you fragments, layers, stains, and pauses. You stand at the edge of an excavation trench. The morning is grey. A thin wind moves over the site, carrying dust against your face. The trench wall drops before you in uneven bands of earth. Each band holds a different silence. Ash, clay, brick, silt, refuse, floor, collapse, rebuilding. No layer explains itself kindly. Mainstream archaeology, shaped by research from institutions such as Chicago, Pennsylvania, and Oxford, confirms that early Mesopotamian evidence must be interpreted through context. Pottery, Architecture, carbon dating, seal impressions, and soil layers all matter. No single object can safely carry an entire theory. That is the discipline's quiet warning. A broken pot can suggest a trade pattern. A rebuilt wall can suggest continuity. A flood deposit can suggest disruption. Yet none of these automatically proves lost rulers, elder gods, or a forgotten master culture beneath all known history. Evidence is powerful. Evidence is also stubborn. You watch an archaeologist brush soil from a floor surface. The motion is slow, almost tender. No one rushes. A careless stroke can erase a mark older than kingdoms. The brush moves, stops, moves again. Dust lifts and settles on the worker's sleeve. This is not treasure hunting. It is listening with tools. A quirky fringe tidbit waits nearby, wearing dramatic boots. Some writers claim that official archaeology hides evidence of a civilization before Sumer because it would disturb established history. It is a tempting story, because conspiracy gives uncertainty a villain. Yet the real situation is stranger and less convenient. Scholars argue constantly. They revise dates. They publish disagreements. They adore a discovery, especially one that lets them politely defeat a colleague. Academia has its own gladiator games. They just involve footnotes. Among scholars, debate continues over the pace and causes of urban emergence in Mesopotamia. Some researchers emphasize environmental stress, while others focus on trade, temple institutions, population growth, or administrative innovation. The argument remains active because the record is partial, and partial evidence resists dramatic obedience. You descend a wooden ladder into the trench. The air below is cooler. The wall smells of damp mineral earth. Small roots hang from upper layers like thin brown threads. At your feet lies a surface once walked by people who never imagined becoming a question. A small bead appears in the soil. It is blue, or perhaps green once cleaned. It may have travelled far. It may have belonged to someone loved, important, fashionable, or simply lucky enough to possess a pretty thing. The bead tells of contact, value, and desire. It does not tell you everything. That restraint matters. Archaeology refuses to say what cannot be supported. It can suggest, compare, and build careful models. It can show that older communities prepared the conditions for later cities. It can reveal continuity beneath famous names. It can show that sacred places were rebuilt again and again. But it cannot honestly fill every darkness. Not yet. Perhaps never. This refusal is not failure. It is integrity. The earth does not owe modern longing a complete narrative. Sometimes the most trustworthy answer is a measured silence, and that silence can feel more unsettling than fantasy. You touch the trench wall lightly. The soil is cool. A mainstream fact steadies the scene. Radiocarbon dating, stratigraphic analysis, and ceramic sequences have transformed understanding of ancient chronology. These methods allow archaeologists to build timelines beyond written records, but they still work within margins of uncertainty. Dates are not magic spells. They are careful estimates resting on samples, context, and interpretation. The past becomes clearer. It does not become simple. Above you. The site director speaks with workers near a table of finds. Their voices are low. Pottery fragments are sorted into trays. Each tray holds pieces that look unimpressive until someone recognizes fabric, shape, firing method, decoration, and context. Expertise often begins where casual eyes become bored. That is mildly unfair, but useful. A plane shard can identify a cultural phase. A rim can suggest a vessel type. A seal impression can reveal administrative practice. A tiny grain seed can help reconstruct diet. Burned plant remains can whisper about fields, storage, and meals. The old world survives in crumbs. You climb from the trench and look across the mound. Nothing here resembles the grand illustrations printed in popular books. The site is rough, exposed, and humble. Sandbags hold edges. Shade cloth snaps in the wind. Buckets sit in lines. The ancient world emerges through paperwork, patience, and aching knees. This is where the hidden truth becomes disciplined. What came before the Anunnaki cannot be answered by imagination alone. It must pass through the cold gate of evidence. That gate does not destroy wonder. It refines it. It keeps the mystery from becoming noise. You walk toward a table where a fragment has been cleaned. It bears marks, but not enough to interpret with confidence. A less careful voice might declare it proof of an unknown language, a vanished ruler, or a forbidden map. The archaeologist simply labels it, records its layer, and waits. Waiting is a scholarly virtue, not a popular one. A fringe imagination wants the fragment to speak immediately. A careful mind lets it remain uncertain. Between those two impulses, the real ancient world trembles into view, incomplete but dignified. Among researchers, there is also debate over how environmental change shaped early settlement patterns. Climate shifts, river movement, salinization, and local ecology all affected where people lived and how they organized labor. Yet every region responded differently, so simple collapse stories can mislead. The earth changed. People adapted. Some settlements grew, others faded. Some traditions survived by moving into new forms. A vanished layer may not mean destruction. It may mean migration, absorption, abandonment, or transformation. Archaeology teaches patience with endings. You stand under a sky now brightening toward noon. Heat begins to rise from the ground. The trench edges sharpen in the sun. A bird lands briefly on a stake, then flies away, contributing nothing to the research but considerable atmosphere. The site remains quiet. That quiet is not empty. It is full of disciplined refusal. It refuses exaggerated certainty. It refuses the easy comfort of one hidden answer. It refuses to turn every gap into proof. Yet it also refuses to flatten the ancient world into dull simplicity. The evidence says that history is deeper than the famous names. It says that known civilizations rested on older foundations. It says that writing arrived after long ages of human experiment. It says that sacred order had roots before official theology. It doesn't say there was a single zero civilization ruling in secret beneath all myth. It does not deny that lost complexity existed. It simply asks you to distinguish possibility from proof and wonder from possession. That request is fair, perhaps a little strict. As evening returns, the excavation closes, tools are covered, finds are boxed, notes are checked. The trench remains open to the dark, a wound in the mound and a doorway into time. You look down once more. The layers wait without apology. Somewhere in those layers lies the world before famous gods, before clear texts, before fixed names. It is not silent because it has nothing to say. It is silent because the language of earth is slow, and human desire is impatient. Archaeology refuses to say more than it knows, and because of that, when it does speak, you listen. The last survivors of before don't always look ancient. Sometimes they wear new names, live inside later hymns, and stand calmly among younger gods as if they have always belonged there. You meet them in fragments, in odd titles, in divine family trees that seem too neat, and in older symbols still clinging to newer stories. The evening air is silver with dust. You stand inside a temple chamber where lamplight touches painted walls and leaves corners in shadow. The scent of oil, wool, and old smoke rests over everything. A priest arranges vessels near a low stand. He moves with practiced care, repeating gestures older than his own understanding. That is how survivors remain. They become customary. Mainstream history confirms that Mesopotamian religion absorbed and reorganized many older local traditions as cities rose and changed. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown that gods could shift roles, merge traits, gain titles, or decline in importance. Divine identity was stable enough to worship, yet flexible enough to survive politics. A god can have a biography. That thought feels strange, but it is essential. Sacred figures did not live outside history entirely. Their stories moved with cities, dynasties, priesthoods, and languages. A local power might become a great deity. Another might become an attendant, a spouse, a child, or a shadowy ancestor in a list. The old world did not vanish. It was adopted. You look toward a clay plaque showing a divine figure. The features are formal, almost unreadable. Hands are raised, eyes are wide. The figure may represent worship, authority, fear, or protection. Its exact meaning depends on context, and context is often the first thing time steals. A quirky fringe tidbit gathers around such images. Some speculative writers claim that certain obscure gods are actually survivors of a civilization older than Sumer, disguised by later priests who no longer knew their true origin. The claim reaches beyond evidence, but it touches a real historical process. Older divine material often survives by changing costume. Names are fragile, functions endure. Among scholars, debate continues over whether some Mesopotamian deities preserve prehistoric roots, regional cult memories, or purely later theological constructions. Researchers at Harvard and Cambridge have treated divine lists as both religious documents and archives of cultural negotiation. The gods appear orderly, but the order may hide centuries of adjustment. You step deeper into the chamber. A small bowl rests near the wall, filled with grain. Beside it lies a figurine, simple and worn. It is not a famous object. It would not stop a crowd in a grand museum hall. Yet it feels intimate, as if someone once placed it there because an old protection was still needed. The great gods may rule the hymns. The small powers guard the doorway. This division matters. In every civilization, official religion and household practice can differ. Grand temples speak in polished names. Families keep older habits near beds, thresholds, kitchens, and graves. A mother may whisper a charm older than the priestly system. A worker may carry a token whose meaning predates the city's official theology. Old beliefs survive in private. They survive because fear is personal. A mainstream fact steadies the quiet. Archaeologists have found protective deposits, figurines, amulets, and ritual objects in Mesopotamian houses and buildings. These finds suggest that people use material practices to defend spaces from illness, misfortune, and unseen danger. Such practices often continued alongside formal temple worship. The temple explains the cosmos. The house protects the baby. Both are sacred. You walk out into a lane where night gathers between mud brick walls. A door creaks. Someone pours water near a threshold. Someone ties a cord around a child's wrist. Someone leaves a small object where danger might enter. These acts are not grand mythology. They are lived theology. They may carry older memory than the official stories. The last survivors of before are not necessarily beings with clear names. They may be gestures, a sprinkling, a knot, a buried figurine, a forbidden word, a lucky mark near a doorway. These things can travel through centuries because they are useful in moments of fear. A god in a text needs scribes. A charm only needs anxiety. Humanity supplies plenty of that. You pause beneath a roof beam where smoke has blackened the plaster. The smell is thick and domestic. In the room below, bread cools on a mat, and children sleep near a wall. The ordinary scene feels more ancient than the temple, because it is harder to replace. Temples fall. Dynasties change. Families still fear fever in the night. Here, the survivors remain closest. Later gods may inherit these household concerns. A goddess becomes linked with birth. A protective figure guards the sick room. A divine name is invoked against demons. Yet beneath the named helper lies the older human need. Older than any proper theology. Protect this life. Hold back the dark. Let morning come. Among historians, debate continues over how popular religion shaped formal religion in ancient Mesopotamia. Some scholars argue that temple theology influenced household practice from above. Others see constant movement in both directions, with private rites feeding larger religious systems. The traffic was likely two-way. Like most things involving humans, You move toward the city gate. Beyond it lies open land, where fields fade into darkness and canals glimmer faintly. Gates are powerful places. They divide safety from exposure, known paths from uncertain ground. No surprise that protective beings gather there in imagination. No surprise that old guardians survive near entrances. The gate smells of dust, animals, and cold iron fittings. A guard leans against the wall. He may honour the city's official god in public ritual, but tonight he also trusts a small sign marked near the gatepost. Perhaps he understands its meaning. Perhaps he does not. It still feels wrong to remove it. That feeling is inheritance. The last survivors of before often remain as reluctants. Do not cross there at night. Do not speak that name. Do not neglect that offering. Do not disturb that mound. These rules may preserve practical wisdom, old trauma, social control, or sacred fear. Usually, they preserve several things at once. History rarely chooses one reason. It prefers a crowded basket. The hidden timeline now appears as a chain of survivals rather than a buried empire. Older communities pass habits to younger ones. Younger cities place them inside divine systems. Scribes classify them. Priests refine them. Families keep using them because life remains uncertain. The Anunnaki, in this view, may carry fragments of older sacred grammar. Their later presence does not erase what came before. It organizes it. It gives high names to deep pressures that once lived in water, earth, doorways, graves, stars, and labour. You look back at the city from the gate. Lamps glow in small squares of darkness. Smoke rises. Dogs bark. The night presses close, but does not enter everywhere. People have built walls, stories, charms, rituals, and gods against it. Some defences are new, some are older than memory. Perhaps the last survivors of before are not hidden because someone concealed them. They are hidden because they became ordinary. They sit under cups, behind doors, inside titles, beneath prayers, and within gestures repeated without explanation. They are the old roots feeding later branches. The wind cools, the stars brighten. A final lamp is covered in a nearby house, and darkness settles softly over the lane. Yet the city does not feel empty. It feels watched over by layers of protection, some named, some forgotten, some too old to separate from habit, and in that layered darkness, you sense that what came before may still be here, not as a lost throne, but as a surviving whisper inside every act meant to keep chaos outside the door. The silence beneath the tablets is not empty. It is layered, dense, and almost breathing, like darkness inside a sealed room. You stand again where clay fragments rest under dim light, and the deeper you look, the less the ancient world explains itself. A tablet can speak, a broken archive can refuse. The room smells of dust, dry clay, wax smoke, and old wood. Outside, night presses softly against the walls. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once, then stops. The sound fades, leaving only the faint scrape of your own breath. Mainstream research from Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago confirms that most ancient writings survived by accident. Fire baked some tablets hard, collapse buried others safely. Many texts were lost, broken, reused, or never written down at all. The archive is not complete. It is a survivor's chorus. That changes everything you think you know. You're not hearing the full ancient world. You're hearing what escaped destruction. A ration list survives while a lullaby vanishes. A royal claim survives while a private doubt disappears. A divine name survives while the older fear behind it sinks into silence. History is not fair. It is selective. A quirky fringe tidbit lingers in this silence. Some writers imagine hidden chambers beneath old sites, filled with perfect tablets explaining the first civilization before all gods. It is a lovely dream, and honestly, very convenient. Yet the true silence is harder and more powerful. The missing record may never return. You walk between shelves where fragments sit in small trays. Each piece has a label, a number, and a wound. Some hold only 2 signs, some preserve the edge of a story, some are too damaged to read with confidence. They seem to ask for completion, but not every broken thing should be forced to confess. Among scholars, debate continues over how much can be reconstructed from fragmentary myths, administrative texts, and later copies. Researchers at Harvard and Cambridge have warned that reconstruction must balance imagination with restraint. A missing line can invite possibility, but it cannot bear unlimited weight. The gap is sacred in its own way. You lean over one fragment and imagine the lost sentence extending beyond the break. It might have named an ancient ruler. It might have described a ritual. It might have contained nothing more thrilling than a list of goats. The past enjoys humiliating expectation. Still, the silence pulls at you, because beneath the surviving tablets lies an older world of spoken stories, hand movements, songs, taboos, field calls, funeral cries, jokes, arguments, and warnings. None of these needed writing to matter. None of them required scribes to shape life. Most human history was breathed, not written. That thought is soft and vast. You move outside into courtyard under moonlight. The mud brick walls look pale, almost bone-coloured. A jar stands near the doorway. A sleeping mat lies rolled in a corner. The objects are ordinary, yet they seem to hold more truth than a royal inscription. People lived here. They did not live as symbols. They worried about food, illness, marriage, debt, weather, children, old age, and whether the roof would behave during rain. The great tablets speak of gods and kings, but the silent ground speaks of bodies. A mainstream fact steadies this descent. Archaeologists often reconstruct daily life through houses, tools, botanical remains, animal bones, and wear patterns. These forms of evidence reveal what texts ignore. They show cooking, craft, diet, repair, and ordinary survival. The quiet evidence is deeply human. You touch a worn threshold with your foot. Many people crossed it. The stone or packed clay has softened where repeated steps passed over it. No one wrote their names, yet their bodies shaped the entrance more honestly than any inscription could. A threshold remembers without language. That's the silence beneath tablets. It is not ignorance, it is another archive, one written in pressure, erosion, soot, seed, bone, and placement. It does not tell stories in order. It does not care for clean beginnings. It asks you to feel your way through traces. Perhaps the hidden truth about what came before the Anunnaki rests there. Not in a single missing tablet, but in the vast unwritten life that gave meaning to later divine systems. Before gods were arranged in lines, people were already living inside mystery. Before myths were copied, the world had already taught fear, dependence, and awe. The tablets are late witnesses. Important witnesses, yes, but late. You stand under the moon as the courtyard grows colder. The smell of clay deepens after nightfall. A breeze moves across the roofline and stirs hanging reeds. The sound is faint, like a whisper refusing words. The silence does not answer your question directly. It changes the question. It asks why you expect ancient truth to arrive as a statement. Perhaps the oldest truth was never a sentence. Perhaps it was a ritual action, a repeated route, a field boundary, a burial posture, a meal given to the dead, a hand lifted towards storm clouds. Some truths were performed, some were built, some were feared, some were never spoken because everyone already knew them. That last kind is the easiest to lose. Among historians, debate remains open over how oral culture shaped early written civilization. Some scholars see writing as a revolution in memory. Others emphasize continuity, arguing that writing preserved only a small portion of older knowledge systems. Both views breathe inside the evidence. Writing changed the world. It did not contain it. You return to the tablet room slowly. The lamp is lower now, and shadows fill the corners. The fragments seem smaller in the dimness, more vulnerable. They have crossed thousands of years and still cannot say everything. That failure feels almost tender. The Anunnaki may stand in the written record with weight and mystery, but the silence beneath them is older than their names. It includes nameless powers, forgotten builders, lost songs, extinct dialects, private griefs, and ceremonies no tablet bothered to describe. This silence is not an obstacle to history. It is part of history. You sit beside the shelves and let the quiet widen. No revelation arrives. No hidden civilization steps forward with a perfect explanation. The zero civilization, if it exists at all, dissolves into something subtler, the deep human layer before official memory, where order was lived before it was written. The clay keeps what it can. The rest becomes atmosphere, and perhaps that is why the oldest world feels so close when it should feel distant. You do not need every name to understand the feeling of a hand on a wall, a bowl set down carefully, a door closed against night, a story told softly so children will sleep. The tablets speak above that silence. The silence holds them up, and in the stillness, you realize that the ancient world has not failed to answer. It has answered in the only way it can, with fragments, absences, and a darkness deep enough to let forgotten things remain forgotten. The story, not yet complete, begins where certainty grows tired and lowers its voice. You stand at the edge of the ancient plain as night settles softly over the rivers. The air smells of cool dust, distant water, and smoke from small fires fading one by one into darkness. Above you, the stars return with their old patience. Nothing announces an ending. That feels right. Mainstream research from Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago confirms that Mesopotamian civilization grew from deep earlier layers of settlement, ritual, labor, and memory. The written gods did not appear in an empty world. They rose from ground already crowded with human effort, sacred habit, and inherited fear. The Anunnaki become visible in tablets, but the world beneath them remains older. You walk across the plain where buried cities lie under low mounds. The famous names are quiet now. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur, and other places seem to sink into the dark, not lost, but listening. Beneath them are older floors, older paths, older hands, and older questions pressed into the soil. The zero civilization does not stand before you as proof. It remains a shadowed possibility. A quirky fringe tidbit still glows faintly in the distance. Some writers imagine one vanished people behind every myth, a first culture destroyed so completely that only divine memory survived. It is a beautiful idea, and dangerous if held too tightly. The evidence does not grant that certainty, yet the longing behind it is understandable. You want the first door, you want the oldest name, you want the hidden beginning that makes every later mystery arrange itself neatly. But ancient history refuses to behave like a tidy locked chest. It behaves more like a river delta, with many channels, shifting banks, hidden currents, and silt covering whatever stood there before. Among scholars, debate continues over how myth, archaeology, and memory should be joined without forcing one to obey the other. Researchers at Stanford and Harvard often remind us that myths can preserve old structures without preserving literal events. They may carry social memory, symbolic truth, political theology, or fragments of disaster. Perhaps all of these move together. You stand where the mud gives slightly under your feet. The ground is cool now. A night bird calls from the reeds. Water slides quietly through a channel, reflecting a broken path of stars. The ancient world seems less like a vanished place, and more like a sleeping presence beneath the modern one. Every civilization begins late. That is the unsettling thought. By the time people name their gods, they have already inherited fear. By the time scribes write origins, mothers have already sung older songs. By the time kings claim first authority, workers have already dug canals, raised walls, and placed offerings in the dark. The verse truth may not have been written. It may have been carried in hands, in roots, in recipes, in warnings, in careful silence near graves, in the memory of floodwater rising too high, in the habit of rebuilding where ancestors once stood. This is how a hidden civilization can exist without being an empire. It can be a layer of practice. It can be the first arrangement of meaning strong enough to survive its makers. It can be the unnamed structure beneath later names, the pattern that teaches people where to place shrines, when to watch the moon, how to divide labour, and why darkness needs guardians. You walk toward a low mound beneath the stars. At its crest, the wind is cooler. The plain spreads outward in soft darkness. Somewhere below, walls are buried. Somewhere deeper, floors wait. Somewhere deeper still, there may be only traces, then nothing readable at all. The silence is not defeat. It is depth. A mainstream fact rests quietly beside you. Archaeologists know that countless early sites remain only partly explored, damaged, buried, or lost to changing rivers and modern disturbance. The ancient record is immense, but incomplete. New findings may change details, deepen timelines, or disturb confident stories. History is still being unearthed. That is why the ending must remain open, not because anything can be true, but because enough remains unknown to keep wonder honest. The Anunnaki may have inherited older divine structures. The Sumerians may have preserved memories from long-vanished communities. Early settlements may have carried ritual systems whose first meanings were already fading when writing began. The story is not closed, it is buried in layers. You feel the slow movement of time beneath the ground. Generations rise and vanish. Shrines are built, ruined, rebuilt, renamed. Gods gain titles and lose them. Workers become numbers on tablets. Children become ancestors. Myths become literature. Literature becomes museum glass. And still, something remains unfinished. Perhaps that is why this question endures. What came before the Anunnaki is not only a question about gods. It is a question about the human need for origins. You look backward and find that every beginning has another beginning under it. You dig beneath the first name and find silence. You dig beneath silence and find a footprint. Then the footprint ends. A softer thought arrives. Maybe the oldest civilization is not waiting to be found as a single city. Maybe it is the first shared human decision to make order against fear, to count grain, to bury the dead, to mark the moon, to build on old ground, to tell children that the world has shape, even when darkness says otherwise. That decision came before many names. It may come before every god. You look up once more. The stars are steady, though the earth below them has changed beyond recognition. The same sky that watched the first fields now watches you, wherever you are listening, in your own room, under your own night. The ancient plain grows quieter. The rivers keep moving. The last image is not a throne before the Anunnaki, nor a hidden king of the Zero civilization. It is a hand pressing wet clay, not knowing what will survive. It is a bowl placed beside a doorway. It is a worker looking at the moon and wondering whether the waters will rise. It is ordinary. It is enormous. Perhaps the hidden truth is that what came before the gods was not less mysterious than the gods. It was human life learning to live with mystery, slowly turning fear into ritual, memory into order, and order into stories powerful enough to outlast the names of those who first spoke them. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now let the plain grow dimmer. Let the tablets rest in their quiet shelves. Let the rivers lose their edges under the soft dark, until water and sky seem to breathe together in one slow rhythm. You no longer need to hold every name, every date, every buried flaw in your waking mind. The old world can keep some of its secrets. You have walked through dust, clay, reeds, temples, fields, and silent rooms. You have felt how history does not end sharply, but fades like lamplight behind a curtain. The first builders return to the ground. The scribes lower their hands. The gods withdraw into names. The stars remain. Your breathing slows. The desert wind passes over broken walls, but gently now. It carries no command, no warning, No final answer. Only the cool scent of night, the memory of water, and the soft patience of things older than speech. Somewhere beneath the earth, a floor waits in darkness. Somewhere above, the moon moves without hurry. Between them, you rest in the small human place, neither first nor last, only listening. Let the mystery stay unfinished. Let the ancient rivers continue. Let the last grain of dust settle. And if some older story still lies beneath all stories, it does not need to rise tonight. It can remain there, calm and hidden, while sleep gathers around you like a quiet temple, and the world becomes softer at the edges. The clay remembers enough, the silence keeps the rest. End of script. Good night.